After a series of lackluster pinballs on Windows, 1995 finally brought us one that was really good. And fun too. Back then, old, hardcore genre fans complained that 3D Ultra Pinball was impossible to recreate in real life, and henceforth considered it a subpar product. But it didn't change that it played great and it paved the way the industry was going. I mean, take a look at arguably the best pinball games we have today, so FX Pinball aka Zen Pinball series of games. Practically 95% tables in them, and they have dozens of these, could never be remade in reality. Anyway, coming back to our game at hand, 3D Ultra Pinball features 3 different tables you can quote-unquote warp between, and in true genre fashion have to score as many points as it's humanly possible. The graphics on the show are a definite highlight of the title. They're in full 3D, and in 1995 they felt photorealistic, unlike any other pinball up to that point in time, and it's just a pleasure to see the game in action. I'd even risk saying that it's as fun played today as the best FX pinball tables are. Big Red Racing is adrenaline-fueled, action-packed, cool Mario Kart-like racer with a touch of off-road and bits and pieces borrowed from another racing games. It's the Sonic the Hedgehog of racers, it's cool, rad, hype and whatever else you would have called it back then. But most of all, it's actually really fun. It features 24 entirely unique tracks, each of having distinctive look and feel, and each offering 2 vehicles to choose from. There's many more obviously, and they can be really crazy and unexpected, like spaceships, snowmobiles, jeeps, helicopters and hovercrafts, to name a few. But there's always only 2 to pick between for each race. All of them allow for in-cockpit view or a wide selection of behind-the-vehicle cameras, so that everyone can play the game the way they like best. And while the vehicles themselves don't look especially great in this early 3D title, and tracks could use a bit more variety in terms of what's around them in the background, the game itself is a riot. And you're not gonna get bored or feel as if there was something missing, or the game lacked content. Big Red Racing is hella fun, and an excellent example of a game that grew old well and is as playable today as it was over 25 years ago. Oh, and obviously Big Red Racing features a whole plethora of multiplayer options over modem and network too. But where it shines, it's its split screen mode where you can enjoy it with or against a friend same way you would have Mario Kart. But faster, crazier and most of all in a very varied form, where each next track plays entirely different than the one before. Big Red Racing is one of those games that would have really benefited from a modern reimagination with polished presentation and sounds and re-release on Xbox Game Pass for instance, where it would have quickly become a hit. Bug is one of the first few 3D platformers on Windows. Only the levels are full 3D though, as character, enemies and pickup sprites are all 2D. Don't let that distract you from playing, cause despite being one of the early titles in the emerging genre, Bug is excellent. There's 6 large and long interestingly designed worlds to beat, and at the end of the game an evil villain of the game awaits too, the Spider Queen. There are also some smaller bosses here and there, and they're really cool if you keep in mind that Bug is a first generation game in its genre. Each world consists of 3 smaller levels, and there are even some simple puzzles and secrets here and there, so you'll hardly get bored playing. You can attack enemies by bouncing on them or using speed or zap when powered up. Graphics are really good for the time, backgrounds are lush and colorful, stages are well designed and feature many different and unique enemies, all waiting for you to experience. Everything seems to be great about Bug, and that's true, but there's one thing that stands out, and its difficulty level. Bug is unforgiving and will be a tough challenge to complete if you decide on attempting to do so. But if you do, when you do, I can pretty much guarantee that it won't feel like a time wasted. Bust-A-Move is a home Windows version of incredibly popular arcade classic. It's not a one-to-one conversion though, as it offers many more levels, new gameplay features and new game modes. The gameplay itself remained unchanged, however, and you still control a bubble shooter at the bottom of the screen, shooting bubbles of random colors at the top, where many more of them are arranged in patterns. If you manage to hit once on the top with your bubble, forming chains of at least 3 bubbles of identical color, they are all removed, and all others that are connected to them and not attached to walls or other bubbles. As you play, the ceiling descends periodically, pushing the bubbles down. The game is lost if any of the bubbles cross the bottom line. In single player mode you have to clear over 100 preset bubble patterns / stages. Some new and special bubbles are introduced here too, like exploding, lightning or water bubbles, and these were not present in Arcade Original. In 2-player mode, which you can play against a friend or CPU opponents, the goal is to make the other player fail by sending bubbles to their screen. You do so by clearing chains of bubbles from your game field. Finally, there's the Endless Challenge mode, which is unwinnable. It continuously adds new bubbles from the top and is played for points. It's a survival mode, if you will. Bust-A-Move is one of the most well-known and popular arcade puzzle games, and not for no reason. It's an amazing and really fun title, which I wholeheartedly recommend. Caesar II is a successor to ever popular first game and a city management / strategy set in ancient Rome, in which you have to build and manage an efficient city in your province. In time you'll gain control of more provinces and will be able to try to become the next Caesar. As in most games in a genre, having a city become prosperous and run like a clockwork is not an easy task, and will require making sure that it's properly supplied with all the necessities, policed so that it's safe from internal and external dangers, that the citizens are happy and have access to all amenities they need, so education, entertainment, baths and temples, and you also need to create industries around the city in neighboring villages that have access to natural resources, like stone or grapes, and then transport those to sell in the market in your city. It's a balancing act. From time to time you'll also be raided by invading tribes and you will have to defend your province. Do that well and create beautiful and successful city and you'll be able to move to more challenging new provinces. Claim to Power is a risk-like game for up to 6 players. Those who've followed this channel for a while know that I hate risk games with passion. Claim to Power takes place on a fictional continent in medieval times, divided into provinces, and you have to conquer the whole continent to win. The game features 5 different resources which directly influence the power of your units, meaning the same army of soldiers will have different combat power depending on how wealthy is the province army is stationed in. If it's wealthy and can easily sustain the unit, it's stronger. If it's not, then it's not. Each turn player can take up to 6 actions and all combat results are calculated by the CPU and displayed as live action videos. I don't like risk games and Claim to Power did not change my opinion about them, but if you're a fan of these, there's a lot to like here. Comix Zone is a side-scrolling fighting game that takes place entirely inside the comic book panels. As most beat-em-ups, it's very linear, always taking the same route from beginning to the end and featuring same enemies and pickups in same spots. One could think that this kind of formula would get boring fast, but since there's literally hundreds of games in the genre, it hardly ever did, it seems. Story-wise, because of course there's a story here explaining the weird setting, you're Sketch Turner, a struggling comic book artist. One night during a strange weather occurrence, lightning strike brings your comic book villain Mortus to life and imprisons you in pages of your own making. So you're both now trapped within the pages of a visual novel and also one drawing it as the game carries on. You have to battle through the pages of your own creation, defeating Mortus's goons, all the way to the final showdown with the villain himself. It's worth pointing out that the comic book frames are not a gimmick but tightly incorporated into gameplay. They are used for various special moves, powerful combat techniques and for traversal. Comix Zone is a really fun and innovative title that is also pretty hard, so keep that in mind. Interestingly enough, it was one of the games that were used as a power show-off of DirectX libraries and new Windows 95 system. It ran in a window and you could stretch it out to change its size on the fly without ever leaving or pausing the game. Command Aces of the Deep is a Windows version of the 1994's DOS original, and it was my most favorite submarine simulation in the 90s. Partly because of how easy it was to pick up and just start playing, partly because it was unparalleled when it came to realism, and finally because it took a little while to master. Since you can pick the exact start point of your campaign, you could in theory play throughout the whole World War II, starting in smaller U-boats, and along the way, while getting promotions, gain command of better submarines. And yes, mention of U-boats is not a mistake, as this time you don't play on Allied side, but take control of a German sub. Graphics-wise, I gotta say that despite the low resolution, it still looks great today, and sounds are as realistic as I could imagine them being in a submarine. Sure, I've never been in one, but that's how I imagine it sounding with all the beeps, bops and dings. If you're in the market for a good sub-simulation, there's hardly anything better available. Congo the Movie Descent into Zinj is a first-person perspective point-and-click FMV adventure game. Wow, is the title or the genre longer for this one? Still, as movie tie-ins go, Congo is actually not that bad. Much better than the grand majority of FMV games that we spoke about in videos covering 1993 and 1994. Anyway, the story covers you going into heart of the Congo in search for a mysterious mythical diamond that is said to be useful in creation of a new way of telecommunications as we know it, and most importantly, you're there to figure out what happened to the previously sent expedition led by Dr. Karen Ross. Saying that the land that you'll visit is unusual is an understatement. There's Egyptian writings all over the place, monster gorillas populate the area, and one of them is sentient English-speaking gorilla named Amy. Finding and perhaps saving the souls of first expedition and a mysterious diamond will be what you'll spend most of your time doing in a typical for the genre inventory puzzles mechanic. Most of Congo's graphics are pre-rendered, not unlike in Myst, short of live-action sequences. While Congo may not be the best FMV game, it's one of the better ones and heaps better than most trash that came out before it. D is weird. That's what she said. Oh my god, cringe. Anyway, D is a first-person horror-themed point-and-click adventure game. Richter Harris, director of one of LA's hospitals, has shut himself inside with a group of patients as hostages and police can't move in, fearing for their lives. So you, playing as his daughter, Laura Harris, rushes in. But after crossing the doorway you find yourself in an old mansion and not hospital. clearly taken by some unknown evil, so you must press on inside against your better instincts to save your father and yourself. Most puzzles in D are inventory based and time limited. In fact, the game comes on 4 CDs and you have roughly 30 minutes to complete each CD. Also, they're quite demanding, but fortunately, despite not having a save game option, the game features built-in hint system. It can only be used 3 times though, so it's best to access it as a last resort. D has multiple endings, so it's worth experiencing it more than once if you happen to enjoy the puzzling to learn all the possible outcomes. In the early 90s, games like Privateer and Frontier were the hype among players such as myself. So those who enjoy epic space operas, freedom of choice involving combat and feeling of being your own ship and steer in your adventure. While very different, both were set in space and fun in their own way. Dagger's Rage is a game that tries to mimic the experience they provided in its own way. Sadly, as much as it tries, it doesn't succeed, same as the aforementioned classics did. You play as space mercenary, or given the time the game takes place in, just mercenary. Same as we call legionaries Roman warriors, but back then they were just warriors. Anyway, you play as one, you have your own ship and your main goal is to stop the pirate menace that's ravaging the space of United Planets. You don't have to follow the plot in the straight line though, and can get back to it whenever you want to, filling your in-game hours with completion of side missions and contracts, grinding for money that then you can later use to get new ships and weapons for them. Dagger's Rage is played from a top-down view, and gameplay/combat-wise, it's more similar to 2D shooters than first-person 3D simulation that Privateer and Frontier were. Dagger's Rage by no means is not an unplayable game. It's just not very good, that's all. Disney's Jungle Book is a side-view action platformer based on a movie of the same title. It places you in bare feet of young Mowgli, raised by wild animals on a quest to find human village and rejoin the civilized society once again. Most of the animals that you'll come across are hostile, which, while odd given the movie, is kinda understandable in a game setting. So you'll have to avoid or defeat them with variety of thrown weapons like bananas and boomerangs to name a few. Level completion is based on amount of crystals picked up within allotted time. Fortunately, a compass at the corner of the screen always directs you to the nearest crystal. There's 15 levels overall, and they're a pleasure to go through, witnessing the beauty of the game in silky smooth and immensely detailed animations that look as if they were torn straight out of the movie. Jungle Book feels polished and is a must-have addition to any platformer fan's library of games. Disney's Toy Story is a horizontally scrolling platformer based on the movie of the same name and loosely following its plot. You control Woody and lead him through a series of levels encompassing scenes from a movie. Woody has a whip and it can be used to tie down enemies to allow Woody to pass them unharmed. He cannot kill them with it though, and the only exception to that is the boss in the form of Nightmare Buzz, who can actually be defeated with it. Whip can also be utilized to latch onto hooks so that Woody can swing above dangers. There are 2 stages within the game that change the format and see you racing a RC car, and they're a nice change of pace in this otherwise directed at youngsters game. If you enjoy the movie, have kids, or a die-hard platformer fan, it's a good game to sink a couple of hours in. First there was nothing, and then there was Doom, and the world changed forever. Year prior's Wolfenstein 3D was perhaps technically speaking the first real FPS game, but Doom was one that everyone remembers, and not for no reason. It took everything that Wolfenstein did and made it better, bigger, faster and more technologically advanced. Stages could be of different height, even if with use of tech trickery, and stairs and lifts were omnipresent. Walls could be aligned to each other at any angle and not only at 90 degrees, and there is also a pretty advanced for the time lighting system, with some rooms in pitch black, others lit just by a few small sources of light. Finally, there are outdoors, pools of water and lava. An inclusion of automap is a godsend in some more complex areas. Doom offers a lot of weapons, each with their own drawbacks and advantages, and each deadlier and more iconic than the previous one. Unlike in Wolfenstein, there are no lives in Doom. You have one, and that's it. And it's gonna last you throughout the entire game, unless you die. You can however find various buffs and boons like medpacks, armor and berserk pack to survive it all. What I always found most captivating about Doom though was the atmosphere. Sci-fi mixed with demonic, all dark, gritty and with plenty of jump scares and gruesome looking foes, often spewing demonic fire at you from afar or rapidly closing the distance between you and them to attack from melee range. There was just nothing like it back then. But while it was all undoubtedly amazing, it still wasn't the most important thing that Doom did. Not even close. Even if we were assumed that it wasn't the first FPS title, it was first online multiplayer FPS game. And even better, offering 2 completely different modes of play. Campaign co-op, which was much more fun with a friend than the base single-player game was, and more popular, more widespread and played, deathmatch, with players fighting against each other for frags. I mean, whole campuses played it. People organized LAN parties and tournaments just to play deathmatch. Doom craze took over the world, and even when the game itself became largely forgotten, deathmatch mode in FPS titles stayed with us to this day, even if in heavily modified modern form. After defeating demons on Mars, our hero returns to Earth, only to find that demons have already invaded it, and it's up to him to save humanity again. Did I mention that the mysterious hero of ours is no other than you? It is. Or you are. So, Doom 2 is basically Doom 1, but better. It plays identical to its predecessor. It could be argued that it was a lazy outing, only adding one new weapon in the form of Super Shotgun, bigger levels and more monsters, but since that was precisely what fans of the first game wanted, Doom 2 was a huge success. The fact that it was pretty much modding friendly from day one extended its life and replayability near indefinitely, and numerous various themed total conversions started popping out basically within weeks from its release. Quite notable among them was the Mortal Kombat themed one, which may not have been the best of them gameplay wise, but was definitely one of the more interesting ideas Doom Engine was used for. In short, if you played first Doom or any other FPS and liked it, you'll love Doom 2. If you didn't enjoy it, however, chances are you won't change your mind because of it. Earthworm Jim Special Edition is an enhanced version of original game and a beloved by many action shooter platformer. It features bigger levels, more secrets and weapons, reworked animations and additional kinds of enemies. Other than that, it's the same game in which you're the titular worm in your advanced spacesuit that grants you arms, legs and a gun to spread destruction and domination all around. When necessary and when you have no other choice, you can also use your wormy body in a variety of ways to overcome obstacles, such as whip your enemies into submission, or as a grappling hook to swing from them, or have them spin like helicopter blades to hover for a short while, which is more smart than just straight up falling from heights. While most of the levels are your typical platforming fare of going from start to finish with an occasional boss at the end, some have special conditions to be completed, like escorting a specific character protecting them along the way, for instance. Every few levels there are refreshers in form of space racing sequences or bungee jumping competition. Frantic gameplay and variety of gameplay styles keeps Earthworm Jim interesting and fun all the way through. The fact that it looks and sounds as if it was taken straight out of cartoon is only a cherry on this already sweet pie. And since we're on the subject, Earthworm Jim did actually spawn at some point a short-lived series of cartoons, but that's just a curiosity and doesn't have much to do with the game itself. Fury 3 is a three-dimensional sci-fi flight combat shooter played in first or third-person perspective, and it looks eerily similar to Terminal Velocity, released earlier for DOS. The Earth has fought numerous wars against evil spacefaring race of Bions, warrior race bred for battle and conquer, kinda like Klingons in Star Trek. While humanity has won, it paid the great price with Earth being a shell of its former self, now decimated in the war's wasteland. Unfortunately, it seems the Bions were not eradicated but started rebuilding on the planet Fury 3 in preparation for retaliation. So as it always ends up when all other means fail, you're to sort the mess out, as you are our final stand against the alien menace. And to do so you have to jump behind steers of an advanced interstellar fighter and go to planet Fury 3 to destroy the Bion threat once and for all. The story, while semi-interesting and an excellent base for a terrible sci-fi B-movie, is largely unimportant. The game is a shooter and should be treated as such. There's hundreds if not thousands of enemy targets to destroy, and that's what you'll be doing for the entire game. And while it may sound repetitive and uninspired, it's actually surprisingly addicting, especially that you can shoot weapon pods when you come across them to upgrade your ship with power-ups. Fury 3 is mindless, fast-paced, crazy fun, and if you like games like that, you'll love it. Hoyle Classic Games is a collection of classic card and board games. These are Bridge, Crazy Eights, Cribbage, Gin, Hearts, Old Maid, Poker, Solitaire, Backgammon and Checkers. You can play all these against a selection of CPU-controlled players of various skill levels, but some can be enjoyed against human opponents too. Each game follows its rules and they're accessible with a press of a button if you're unfamiliar with them or want to check something. Stats are held for the games and average rating is kept if you want to track how you improve. Hoyle Classic Games is fun if you're into the classics and have no one to play with in real life. Otherwise, there were other, more action-packed and exciting games released for Windows in 1995. Night Moves is a strategy and arcade mixture of unusual proportions. The game takes place on an expanded 10x10 chessboard and leaves you in control of a knight chess piece navigating increasingly more difficult chessboards filled with enemies, hazards, power-ups and treasures. The knight moves in typical L-shaped pattern, so you have to keep that in mind while traversing the board. What's worse, all the strategy elements of chess have been removed, as you have literally just a few seconds to make each move. It turns the strategic classic with added interesting original ideas into fast-paced romp that at times, especially in later levels, feels like an arcade title and henceforth loses a lot of its appeal. I really like the idea behind the gameplay loop in Night Moves, I just don't enjoy the execution, and especially the unforgiving timer. Lemmings and oh no, more Lemmings were sold as a single package for Windows, which seems fair from my point of view. Rather than charging for a full game, they were offered as 2-pack, which was more wallet friendly and did not double charge gamers for a title that they already knew very well. I assume that you know what these puzzling classics are, but if you don't, let me quickly try to explain. Lemmings and its successor are puzzle games where your goal in each level is to lead a group of anthropomorphic creatures, titular lemmings, to safety. And since between the start point and the exit there are usually numerous obstacles and hazards, it's your job to use limited number of available abilities that you can assign to them to do so. Levels are divided into 4 groups of different difficulties: fun, tricky, taxing and Mayan. Those groups reflect number of obstacles, kinds of uses of available abilities, time limit and minimum amount of lemmings that need to be saved. The second game in the package, Oh No, More Lemmings, follows the identical gameplay formula, only adding 100 new puzzling challenges to beat. Upon its release, Lemmings became an instant hit, often being placed in the very best and top games list in various gaming mags and in hearts of players. It quickly received ports to other 8 and 16-bit systems, one of them being this Windows release, which technically was 32-bit, but you know, potato potato, tomato tomato, Batman man bad. And same as all the other ports, this gained critical acclaim and popularity too. I suppose Doom and then later on Skyrim were not the first games devs wanted to release on anything that could run it, regardless if they even should or not. Lode Runner Online: The Mad Monk's Revenge is the longest title game in this video and also a sequel/remake of year prior's Lode Runner: The Legend Returns. It features the same selection of single-player stages with an addition of 30 new ones and a completely new separate co-op multiplayer game mode with 150 new levels to beat. This mode expands on the basic gameplay formula by adding unique and not seen before hazards for both of you to beat. But what is this quote-unquote new Lode Runner game if you've never heard of it? Well, it's a perfect example of how all sequels should be made in an ideal world. It's an extension and expansion upon original idea, but not to the point of feeling like a completely different game. It features incomparably better sounds, music and graphics and high-resolution SVGA display, so that all levels fit on a single screen. There's also more tools at your disposal than there were in original released in the 80s, so you have small and big bombs, a drill for harder surfaces like stone for instance, booby traps and others. It's basically the same game as first Lode Runner at heart, but modernized and expanded. Each level is a small platforming puzzle to solve. Your aim is to collect all the gold, and when you do, exit opens up somewhere on the level and you can go through it to the next one. You are, however, always chased by the buddies that try to catch you. When they do, you lose a life. You're not helpless though and can spawn pits on your left and right, and they can serve either as means of traversal between the platforms, meaning you can jump down through them, or as traps for the buddies that chase you. Pits seal themselves automatically after a few seconds, and mastering the use of them is a key to success. Lode Runner Online is surprisingly fun and engaging experience in single or multiplayer, despite how simple its underlying mechanics are and how old its gaming concept is. Believe it or not, but McKenzie Co is a game by American Laser Games known for such FMV hits as Mad Dog McCree or Crime Patrol. And it's entirely different kind of a game to those action-packed ROMs. It's not a bad one at all, just clearly targeting teenage girls. I'm not sure that the sentence containing words targeting teenage girls in such order should ever be in any YouTube video, but I'll take my chances. Anyway, designer's choice means that I'm not the best audience for it, but I can appreciate it for what it represents nonetheless. It's a first-person FMV adventure game where you play as a teenage girl based in and around fictional Madison High School. The ultimate goal of the game is to pass your final exams, graduate and have a boyfriend to go to prom with at the end of the year. But that's what the game's supposed to end with, and all you'll do up to that point would be your typical high school life stuff, like deciding what to wear, attending classes, talking to friends, studying, doing your homework, shopping for clothes, going to parties and on dates, and even working after school. Besides one of 2 available characters that you can play as, there's also 6 close friends that you get to make in the game, and 20 other interactive characters, 5 of them being teachers. The gameplay is composed out of video clips showing a particular situation, problem or occurrence, and you choose your response by picking between one of several available replies. Then the result of said choice is played out as another video clip. Rinse and repeat. There's also quite a few small minigames in McKenzie Co that serve as ways of solving many of the in-game problems, like school tests or ways to earn extra money for clothes. Some of them are variations of fun favorites like concentration, Tetris and picture puzzles. As FMV games go, despite the subject that's not really my cup of tea, McKenzie Co is excellent, with stellar cast that plays their parts well, and fun even if a bit linear gameplay loop. So if you ever wondered how it would feel to be a part of Beverly Hills 90210, that's how. When I was a kid I used to play Monopoly with my parents and sister, sometimes cousins, and many times with friends. Nah, just kidding, I had no friends, I had video games. And now, go figure out which one was true. Anyway, Monopoly was the board game to play, and if I'm to be honest, as much happened over the board as it did on it. So all the negotiations, arguments about who should trade what for what else or how much something is really worth is what took a lot of time. Not to mention that the person taking care of the bank had to be picked carefully before each game, as some were more honest than the others. And it was not unusual to find my cousin having couple extra grand more than anyone else, seemingly for no reason. It was fun. So, naturally, whenever a computer version of the game was released, I was interested and eager to try it out. And as Monopoly games on PC go, this one's excellent in multiplayer that up to 6 gamers can enjoy at once in hot seat or even over the internet. It brings the spirit of entrepreneur board game to life with ease and is the next best thing if you don't have Unlock Original available or when people you play with are in remote locations. So if you have someone you can play it with, it's a huge recommendation and you'll love it. But, and that's a huge but I'm afraid, CPU players are simply put dumb. It's very easy to dominate them and hardly any game lasts as long as you'd liked it to, and quickly deteriorates to a speedrun to the endgame as they can't really offer any serious opposition. To summarize, Monopoly on Windows is fun with people but also entirely skippable bore if you're alone. Beavis and Butthead in Virtual Stupidity is a point-and-click adventure game based on popular in the 90s MTV's animated TV series. And it's as stupid of the game as the TV show was. And you know what? Good, cause that's exactly what its fans wanted from the game. A TV show, but in an interactive format. Your main goal of the game is to get Beavis and Butthead to join Toad's gang, so that they could feel as cool as he is. And as point-and-click adventures go, this one's incredibly good, despite very polarizing duo at the forefront. It's easy to get into, stays faithful to the original material, and is a pleasure to solve and go through to the very end. And let's not forget that it's hilarious, all throughout. Most puzzles are inventory based, and while not all, but a huge chunk of them are solvable based on logic and reasoning, even if a bit distorted by a prism of characters you play as. Some are just completely illogical and only completable by trial and error. The game features some arcade minigames too, and while they're not as deep as the main game is, if word deep can even be used when talking about Beavis and Butthead, they're a nice change of pace and thematically fit into the TV series lore. The numerous video clips are also funny and made in the vein of TV show, so playing the game feels like being in the episode and also being able to influence the outcome of it. Even if, like most the other adventure games, this one's entirely linear. The cast from the show reprises their roles for the game, so Beavis and Butthead is entirely voiced and not only subtitled. To summarize, if you like the show or are adventure games aficionado, you'll love it. If you're allergic to the explosive duo though, avoid it at all costs. Oregon Trail 2 is an improved and expanded version of the original game. It roughly follows the same gameplay structure, simulating travel from Independence, Missouri to Willamette River and Valley in Oregon, with all the adventures, troubles and educational breaks that the original served. This time you don't have to preset start year and can pick any between 1840 and 1860, and also your character's background occupation, which will define his bonuses and passive skills. These in turn influence successes and failures at various activities you'll partake in during the travel, so someone with medical background would be better at healing himself and others, and someone with shooting skills would be more proficient at hunting. In short, it's Oregon Trail but on steroids, and probably the best version of the game to date. But for the 2 or 3 of you who've never heard of it, let me explain what the original was, as I've only mentioned the differences between the two here. The Oregon Trail is one of the very first roguelites. Yeah, I said it. And it is, if you think about it. On your journey to Oregon, you have to stock up on provisions so that they would last as long as possible, and then plan out your daily schedule to take your group's needs into consideration, so how much they should eat, when to rest, etc. You'll also hunt, cross rivers, and react to various happenings, good or bad, that will without a doubt sooner or later befall upon you. Oregon Trail is one of the most influential games in history of all gaming, and countless kids grew up with it, learning about stock management, hardships of colonial times, and infamous dysentery. Not many people realize, however, that in reality most of us saw either Oregon Trail Deluxe or Oregon Trail 2 growing up, rather than the first title, which compared to the other two is rather simplistic and poor in features. Oregon Trail 2 on Windows is easily the best version of the game, but if you've only access to the other one, give it a go, it's definitely fun too. PBA Bowling is first in a series of PBA licensed bowling games on PC, and while that sounds epic and all, the game's definitely not for everyone. You have to either be interested in the sport or like bowling or, and that's the last or I promise, have up to 3 others with you, want to compete with them on PC in something and have no other games to do so. That's your basic target audience for the game. And that's okay, cause I'm pretty sure the devs knew from day one that they were not making a game of all games to suit all tastes and entertain ages 3 to 300 or 100 or whichever age people lived to back then. Luckily, despite not doing it often or even literally having done it like a dozen times only in my entire life, I do like bowling and also playing bowling with friends, be it in real life or digitally. And PBA Bowling delivers on all fronts. It follows all rules of the game, presents itself in clear and easy to understand way, and takes use of Windows as well Windows-based system comfortably, with each little window serving a different purpose, one showing your bowler, other score, other pins, and so on. And the bowler animation, while not having many frames to it, is pretty fun to watch in excitement awaiting that next strike. In the end, if you have at least a passing interest in bowling or bowling games, PBA Bowling definitely deserves a spot in your collection. But if you don't waste your time on it. Pitfall the Mayan Adventure is a side-scrolling platformer and a sequel to 1982's original Pitfall. This time you play as Harry Pitfall Jr., and you're not in search of a treasure, but your father who disappeared somewhere in the Mayan jungle. It doesn't mean that you skip and ignore all the treasures that you'll find on your quest, but only that they're not what you're there after. They're a nice bonus though. Anyway, the game is your typical simple platformer, spiritually based on original, serving similar pits, swinging ropes, and dangers in form of snakes and other various creatures that the original did have. But 1995 was 12 years after the original game dropped, and the difference between the two is dramatic to say the least. The quality of graphics in this modern Pitfall is outstanding. It's super richly detailed, beautifully designed, and butter smoothly animated. I'd say that it looks incredible even today. Same can be said about sound design, which is just fantastic. And all that is even more impressive if you keep in mind that Pitfall the Mayan Adventure was made with Windows 95 in mind, heavily using its DirectX libraries, which not only allowed for high quality graphics to be displayed fast and super smooth under Windows, which I must add before was not a given, but also for resizing of the game window on the fly, even as you were actively playing the game. Sure, the maximized window, and I don't mean full screen here, just maximized, would require a lot more horsepower to run than the default resolution did, but it was possible, and that's what was important about it. The game is composed out of 13 levels covering Mayan jungle, waterfalls, deserted mines and such, and it's a pleasure to play and experience all the way through, even if a boomerang is your main means of defense against several in-game creatures, seemingly bent on killing you for no reason. What's worth pointing out though is that Pitfall is not overly difficult, so if you're at least semi-proficient at platformers, then most likely it's a game that you can complete in one sitting. The box cover for Pressure Drop says it's the most fun you'll have with Windows 95. It's a lie. The most fun Batman's having on his Windows 95, because yes, that's what's still powering his Batcave computers, apparently for security reasons, is showing everyone, even those who're not into it at all, his collection of pictures of rare birds. I know, you would have never taken him for a bore, but believe me, when he's not fighting crime or another bag of Cheetos, the man is incredibly dull. What? Oh, okay, sorry. I'll tell him now if it's so important. So, yeah, he asked me to tell you that I'm incredibly disrespectful for not mentioning his pictures of butterflies too, and that he's Batman. So I did, and we can get back to our game, Pressure Drop. While not being de facto the most fun you can have with Windows, Pressure Drop is actually pretty fun, even if not addictive whatsoever arcade puzzler for 1 or 2 players. It's easy to learn and get into, draws you instantly, and is fun to play around for 10-20 minutes and move on to something else. Cause while it's definitely not a bad game, its staying power is somewhat limited. The core gameplay is based upon sets of bricks falling from the top of the screen and you controlling the so-called chromagun at the bottom. It has 5 colored lenses attached to it and you have to shoot said chromagun at the bricks with appropriate color lens chosen, to change all the bricks in the set to the same color. When you do, they disappear. Between the falling bricks and your chromagun hangs the border bar. It signifies the bottom of the game field the bricks cannot pass, so by extension of that, time you have to remove them. Each time set of bricks hits it, it raises, thus lowering the amount of time you have to tackle each set. And each time you clear the set, it lowers a little, effectively giving you more of it. And that's pretty much it. Pressure Drop is fun in short bursts every once in a while, but I don't see myself spending hours on end playing it. Pro Pinball the Web is a special one. It's a pinball simulation with an emphasis on a simulation. It features only one table, and while in case of many other games it would have reduced its significance considerably, here it doesn't matter that much, cause the devs did not aim for the quantity, but realism and quality. So while it's just the web table here, it's incredibly realistic, accurate to the point of being difficult to distinguish from a real thing. Physics and gameplay wise, that is. Because the ball moves and acts exactly the way you've seen it thousands of times on real machines in arcades. which also means that it's a bit more demanding pinball title than your usual PC outings. Especially that it doesn't feature any unrealistic or impossible to implement in real life tables features. So it feels mechanical, it feels even simple in design at times, but it also feels right. And that's not something you can say about many games in a genre. So mashing the paddles maniacally and hoping for the ball to hit something that will give you big points is pointless here. You actually have to play the table a lot, learn all the ins and outs of it to be able to enjoy it thoroughly. The fact that the graphics and sounds are stellar and well suited for it are just icing on this already sweet cake of a game. I'm not gonna lie, I really love my quote-unquote impossible tables that you find in modern FX pinball games and prefer them to the realistic ones because I find them more varied and better suited for Sunday pinball gamers such as myself, but if I was aiming for true-to-life experience, Pro Pinball the Web nails it. Or webs it, because why not? Rayman is a proof that PC could pull off platformers as good, if not better, than those found on consoles. In fact, when it comes to 2D ones, Rayman is probably the most technically and graphically sophisticated game for the time it released in. And at the time, the only other platform that got the port of it was the infamous short-lived Atari Jaguar. Infamous for not understanding math and how the bits work, at least for the purpose of their commercials. But quite fun, if a bit underappreciated otherwise system. Rayman follows a classic story of good versus evil, so Rayman versus Mr. Dark respectively, and it's an action platformer featuring an unusual hero. One that does not have arms or legs, but hands and feet despite that. Aside from standard running and jumping found in other platformers, Rayman can also hover for a short time using his hair as a propeller and throw his fists as an attack. They can be wound up too for more powerful devastating punch. The game is composed out of 6 big worlds and they're a marvel and pleasure to witness and experience. All the graphics are excellent, colorful and expertly crafted to paint the picture of 6 unique and captivating locales throughout which you traverse, accompanied by a stellar sound design. It looks, sounds and plays like a AAA title, and it's easily the best of the best PC could do when it came to action platforming, and an incredibly fun and easy to pick up game that I believe everyone should try. Windows version, other than running in a modern operating system, is virtually identical to the DOS port. And if there are any real differences between them, I fail to recall them. Simply put, it's probably the best arcade game out of this whole video. Phantasmagoria is a FMV point-and-click dark horror adventure with omnipresent early QuickTime events. A very heavy emphasis is placed on the cutscenes and full-motion video bits to advance the story. The main character, Adrienne, is fully digitized and displayed on a background of the pre-rendered house inside which majority of the game takes place. It's an old mansion that she just moved into with her husband Donald, but shortly after moving in she starts experiencing horrifying nightmares and her husband begins to change, for the worse. So she must discover the secret of the mansion before the evil that's within it consumes her husband entirely. While Phantasmagoria is a classic adventure offering puzzle solving as most games in a genre do, their amount is heavily reduced as compared to other Sierra releases. Instead, focus is placed on a full motion action sequences. It doesn't change the fact that typically for Sierra's games your character actually can die in many situations, and she will more than you'd like. This time, however, given the story and the background, it's quite fitting, so I'm not complaining, it's just an observation. All in all, next to Under a Killing Moon we spoke about in an earlier DOS history video, Phantasmagoria is one of the better examples of well-implemented full-motion technology in games. After you escape pod crushers on a mysterious planet, you find yourself in a world other than what you're used to. It houses the titular Robot City, a city entirely built, run and inhabited by robots only. With a very limited human contact and human rules governing their behavior other than the free rules of robotics, they all have evolved in their own special and unpredictable to us way. Well, there was one person there too, but he was killed in mysterious circumstances, and for whatever the reason, you've ended up being a prime suspect of said murder. For the most part, Robot City plays like myth, but with an exception that there's far less puzzles and most information and plot progress comes from finding different robots and talking to them. So keeping an eye on details hidden within robust conversation trees and applying logic and reasoning to all you learn will be a key to finishing the game by proving your innocence, learning what's needed to save the city, and secret behind your true identity. Because of course that there's a secret. Interestingly enough, many of the quote-unquote quests in Robot City can be skipped and ignored, and you don't have to 100% game to see the ending. So while the main story is linear, all the side activities aren't and are not required for completion. Robot City is a title clearly made for adventure game fans. If you're not one, the entry barrier and unclear at times design may be disheartening, so better steer far from it. And since we're on a subject of games like myth, Shivers is another one of these. And another one that was made for hardcore slideshow adventure games fans. It's not set in space on an unknown planet or a mysterious island, but starts like a B-movie budget teenage slasher horror. And for the good part of the first hour or so it feels like it too. Soon enough, however, you'll realize that spending a night in a haunted mansion on a dare from your friends is more dangerous and deadly than you would have ever believed possible. The museum is bizarre to say the least, and as you go about it exploring its countless rooms, you'll gather various tidbits of information and details about arcane myths, legendary beings and creatures, ancient civilizations and occult stories. All that, along with diaries of people who previously disappeared or worked in the museum, will slowly start to puzzle form into a bigger picture, telling you the whole macabre story. As with most myth-like games, attention to detail and keen eye are required to gather everything that's crucial. An analytic approach to put it all together into a comprehensive and captivating story is a must. While graphically Shivers may feel at times kitsch, non-linear gameplay and unprecedented sense of gratification each time you solve a tiny piece of a larger puzzle is all here, and renders it as a true hidden gem that sadly only hardcore adventure games fans will appreciate. This one's gonna be a short one as there's not much to say really. Shanghai II Dragon's Eye is another one of those mahjong games. You're presented with series of various game boards in 12 different patterns of pre-set-up mahjong tiles, and you have to remove tiles in pairs in such a way that all would be taken off the board and screen cleared. I mean, you know it already, everyone played one of these at some point in their life, so there's nothing new here. The interesting difference, however, is the inclusion of the titular Dragon's Eye mode, which is a competitive two-player variant of the classic, in which one player has to remove the tiles and another is trying to place them in such a way that would make the former impossible. If you like those slower, relaxing games or are keen on seeing how it would play against someone, give it a go. It's as good as these go. SimFarm is SimCity's smaller cousin. Instead of building cities, however, you construct and then manage a farm. Difference may not seem too big in theory, but in practice is gigantic. Where SimCity is a very proactive game where there's always something to build, bulldoze, move or repair, in SimFarm, where you design and build your farm, before you're ready for expansion there's a long period of planning, planting and waiting. When you plant crops and have to wait for them to mature, before harvesting and eventual sale, there's not that much to do other than plan crop rotation and future expansions. So it's a slower, more reactive game. In a way, it's similar to idle games of today where you issue a series of commands and then wait much longer than the playing itself took for them all to be processed before issuing new ones. And to be honest, I'm not a big fan of that. It may be my undiagnosed ADHD or just that it feels boring, but just sitting there and watching stuff happen is not my definition of fun. Anyway, aside from crops, you can also partake in husbandry, raising cows or pigs among others, but if you ever played SimFarm before, you'll know very well that while it seemingly adds another layer of gameplay, having to fulfill animals' needs, it's not very profitable. All that said, while it's obvious that SimFarm could never overtake SimCity in popularity or depth, it's not a bad title to play once every few years or so. As in general, despite many small issues, it's pretty fun if you're patient. SimCity 2000 is a sequel to original SimCity and, as the title suggests, a city building simulation. It was also the very best version of SimCity until SimCity 4, which came out many years later. Some believe that it's the very best overall, but I suppose it's down to personal preferences. Anyway, it's a much improved title when compared to original, as it was hugely expanded and improved upon, both in terms of substance and presentation. The game is played from an isometric top-down perspective and features beautifully, extremely detailed pixel-perfect graphics, also very memorable and atmospheric even if only MIDI-based soundtrack. Gameplay-wise, SimCity 2000 was so expanded that it could be considered an entirely different game. Underground map was added for water pipes and subway lines, there was numerous new building types like prisons, schools, libraries, museums, marinas, hospitals and arcologies, which were sorta modern ecological near self-sustained cities within cities. You can now build highways, bus and train depots, railway tracks, seaports and airports. And there are 9 different spec'd and working power plants. Most of them have a lifespan and either need to be rebuilt when said lifespan ends, or you'll have to risk possible explosion, fire or meltdown. There's a lot of content in SimCity 2000 and because of that, it's one of those games that theoretically could be played near infinitely. One of the biggest changes to the original's formula, however, are the city ordinances, which allow for setting up of certain rules and laws, if you will, that your city will follow, and in turn they offer benefits to it. To summarize, SimCity allows you to build and expand your city from ground up, connect it to your neighbors and watch it grow to become the metropolis of its inhabitants' dreams. And you're responsible for everything: budget, planning, expansions, and even damage control in case of any of the possible disasters. Windows version is a perfect fit for SimCity's Windows-based design, and it's easily the best and most playable version of this outing in the series. It's a game that stole hundreds if not thousands of hours from my life, as even today, whenever I launch it for whatever the reason, be it a video or just because, I can't help myself and end up playing it for hours on end. But you know what? Not a single of those hours feels wasted. Simon the Sorcerer II, The Lion, The Wizard and the Wardrobe is Adventuresoft's second in popular line of parody point-and-click adventure games. You're Simon and you've been transported into a parallel universe of magic and monsters that you've visited in a previous game, all via magic wardrobe created by the first title's villain, Evil Sorcerer. Your quest, should you choose to accept it, not that you have any choice in the matter though, is all about finding fuel for the wardrobe, searching for it in a vast world consisting of parodies of popular fantasy novels and fairy tales. And it's a recurring theme in Simon the Sorcerer that it takes what's popular and well known and adds its own little fun twist to it. It was a pretty well received game when it released by both gamers and reviewers, and over its original lifespan before being resurrected on GOG years later, it sold over 600,000 copies, which is nothing to scoff at if you keep in mind that it's a point-and-click adventure, a game in a genre that was slowly being pushed aside by other more action-packed genres like FPS and RTS from 1995 onward. That said, in 1995 it was still a valid and popular genre, and this Windows version is really good. It doesn't add anything meaningful to DOS original rather than allowing Windows users to enjoy it without the need of restarting their machines into DOS and having to configure sounds and graphics options, it just works. And that's what the most crucial change that early DirectX Windows gaming brought to the masses. You didn't have to reconfigure things most of the time and could just run a game and forget about it. It was not obviously the case with all games, and as we know now something that's definitely not the case anymore, but back then it was the talking point. Anyway, Simon the Sorcerer II is in my opinion the best adventure game in this video and an excellent title that is beloved by many who grew up in the 90s. Simtown is SimCity's younger cousin. On a face value it's the same game just on a smaller scale, so instead of working from zero to huge sprawling metropolis, you're building up a small town. You never aim for anything bigger, you just want your little town to grow a tiny bit bigger and get a lot of cozier for your inhabitants, which caused some of original's in-depth to go away and be replaced by cute, colorful and detailed cartoon graphics. Simtown is clearly aimed at younger audience, a future players of bigger sim games. And you know what? It's cool. Cause while it may not be as deep of a game as its older siblings, it's quite good, even if you're an adult, if you're only in the right mindset that is. So your aim here is to nurture a small town community rather than build a huge city. You start slow, similarly to SimCity, by building houses, roads, schools, workplaces and various civic buildings. While there's a lot of variety in design of these, there's not much in what they offer sadly. So often the choice between continental white and classic brown house can realistically be just down to personal aesthetic preferences. What is quite well represented in SimTower, however, is the ecology, and by that I mean you'll have to plant trees, take care of the rubbish disposal and keep water and air quality in check. So it's more of an educational title rather than the full-fledged simulation. Which makes sense if you consider the fact that you no longer need to care for supplying and distribution of energy within the town, or money. Yeah, there's no money in Simtown. For everything that you want to build or construct, you pay with water, trees and crops. Even more so, remember the RCI from SimCity? So, residential, commercial and industry requirements meter that showed you which of these was in highest demand? You know, the meter you based your city's future expansions on. It's gone. All you have now is Sorta RC. Sorta cause there's no borrow number that could give you the measurable impression of how much one is more needed than the other. You have a seesaw swing with R building on one side and C on the other. It's not readable for those who require precise data to plan their progress further. And that is where we hit the proverbial nail in the head. Just like I stated initially, Simtown is a game for kids. Sure, you can play and enjoy it as an adult, but just don't expect same engagement, same depth, or I dread to say it, same fun from it. It's cool to check it out once every few years, but you're not gonna come back to it, same way you do to, let's say, SimCity 2000. Sonic the Hedgehog was a huge game beginning of the 90s. Next to Super Mario Bros, Sonic was an example of the best in the genre and a benchmark for most platformers for years to come. It was a dream that all owners of systems other than that of Sega wanted to experience in one way or another, to play it, to have access to. But no one did. Not until 1995 at least, when suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, Sonic CD appeared on Windows 95 PCs. And not only PC owners who needed a good platformer got one, but they've got one of the GOATs. Sure, we had cool games like Just Jack Rabbit, Rayman or even Earthworm Jim, but all we really secretly wanted all that time was one of the two legends. And that year, Sega delivered. I don't know if it was their own initiative or if Microsoft showered them with cases full of many thousands of green people from history times. I wonder if anyone will get this reference. But the point stood, we got the game. And it was awesome. Nothing was lost in translation, Sonic had all his iconic moves and all the levels presented in Sega CD original were here. The story, while dreadfully basic and blunt, was in full swing and unchanged as well. And most importantly, it was a blast to play. And while Sonic was never in any of its iterations a huge game, usually just a few zones divided into smaller acts, It was incredibly addicting, and seeing everything it had to offer because of the speed of the game runs at required at least few playthroughs. As I said all that, I'm gonna come clean now. I like Sonic, but I'm not a huge fan. I enjoy it once in a while, especially as a pick up and play for 5-10 minutes type of a game, but it's just too fast for me to play for longer periods. Between the two, so Sonic or Mario, I will always without fail choose Super Frog. Space Quest 6 Roger Wilco in Spinal Frontier is the sixth and last part of original Space Quest series of Sierra's adventure games. And as adventure titles go, this one's excellent, if you like wacky, full of pop culture parodies kind of humor. Also a great conclusion to a long-running series, and while it can be played standalone, it's best if you at the very least played former 5th part before, cause this one's building on its story. You play as Roger Wilco once again, and despite saving the universe countless times, your superiors charge you with various violations of galactic law and deprive you of all honors, demoting you to space janitor again. This, however, will not change the fact that once more, despite being the butt of all jokes, you will stand up to the challenge and save the universe. Or not, cause you know, same as in most Sierra's games, you can die in Space Quest 6. On a side note, this time at the very least it's not an instant game over, but lets you restart from just before you died. So that's a welcome even if late in the franchise change. Space Quest 6 does not hold off. It's chock full of jabs at modern at the time pop culture, at sci-fi movies, and none of them are given a hands-off treatment, so if you're into sci-fi and like odd quirky humor, you'll have a time of your life playing the game. That said, many of the puzzles sadly are a bit off, meaning they're not always based in logic and may require a creative or even worse trial and error approach, which is the worst possible kind of puzzles you can find in an adventure game. All that said, Space Quest 6 is fun, so if you're at the very least at all into point-and-click adventure games, you'll have a lot of fun with it. If you're not, give it a try, cause perhaps the hilarious over-the-top situations and dad jokes will just make it the game for you. If all that fails, then, well, let's move on to our next game. Star Trek The Next Generation: A Final Unity is a hybrid adventure game with some light strategy elements and a lot of fun for both fans of adventure games and Star Trek alike. Me? I'm of the latter kind. Batman's leaning towards the former, as he's saying that the adventure games remind him of his shenanigans over the years and all the cases he had to solve. So we can actually enjoy this one together. Go figure. In Final Unity you play as legendary Captain Jean-Luc Picard of USS Enterprise NCC-1701D, and I don't care what others say, he is the best Star Trek captain of all time. Go ahead, come at me and destroy me in the comments below, I dare you. Anyway, the gameplay is composed of traditional point-and-click adventuring with free roam space exploration, diplomatic encounters and tactical ship-to-ship combat. All of the TV show's cast reprises their roles, and believe it or not, they're short of magnificent. Story-wise, Enterprise, while on a routine patrol around Romulan Neutral Zone, intercepts a distress signal of Guardian ships seeking asylum in Federation space. As it turns out, Garidians are in a search of legendary Guardian's 5th scroll, which could prevent the war on Gary. Upon closer investigation and weighing all the implications, Captain Picard agrees to assist them. The gameplay is divided into two main sections. First, on board of the Enterprise, where you're basically waiting for the Enterprise to arrive at the next chosen destination and can use various areas of the main bridge and seek advice of your crew members. Which, you know, our beloved Jean-Luc always did, gathering all his senior officers in the TV series to pick their brains and seek opposing points of view. Second section are the away missions, where you'll be visiting different space stations and alien worlds. This is also where you control the away team. Away missions are a pure point-and-click adventure and follow all the tropes of the genre, like inventory management and puzzle solving. While story parts of the game are mainly linear, they can branch out a little bit depending on the choices made during conversations. To summarize, if you're a fan of the series, there was no better game to immerse yourself in 1995. Though there was also a Deep Space Nine Harbinger, but that's a story for another video and it didn't come out on Windows. Before I say anything else, let me lay a bit of a background for you, at least for those who are not long-time subscribers of this channel. I love Star Trek, to bits, it's the best. Not gonna go into details, but that's the case here, and I always preferred it to Star Wars. Reasons are many and ranging from deep to superficial, but that's also another case of the subject not for today. But let me assure you, it doesn't mean that I don't like Star Wars, and that this next game, so Rebel Assault 2, The Hidden Empire, will get a lacking coverage here. Quite the contrary. As FMV pure action games go, this one's pretty good. So Rebel Assault 2 The Hidden Empire is a FMV on-rail shooter, meaning backgrounds are full motion videos and you're fighting against various enemies in different game modes overlaid on top of those backgrounds. Story-wise, following the events of the first Rebel Assault game, you're once again playing as Starfighter pilot codenamed Rookie 1. While scouting the Drayton Nebula region, and I'm sorry cause my lack of in-depth knowledge of Star Wars lore may have butchered the pronunciation of that, you receive a distress call from a freighter, straight from the region where ships are known to go missing. So naturally you decide to investigate, and what you find there is no freighter, but a secret hidden Imperial presence plotting to destroy the Rebel Alliance once again. All the way through the game's story you'll meet many characters who will aid you in dismantling the Imperial tutorial plot but will require your help in return. Fair exchange in my books. Unlike most other FMV games, Rebel Assault 2, while still being largely linear and only ever giving you a chance to pick alternate routes a few odd times throughout its run, it's really varied in terms of gameplay sets. So you'll be flying an X-Wing, in Millennium Falcon, you'll even ride the speeder bikes and obviously will fight on foot too. All that makes for an engaging and fun action. Now, acting in the cutscenes is another thing entirely. It's beyond bad. It's so wooden stiff that it balances on that magical invisible border of going from tragically bad to amazingly good because of it being so bad. Sadly, it never really goes through it, and most of the time it either feels cheesy or lackluster at best. That said, we have to keep in mind how limited action FMV games are overall, so there's only as much as you can do with a medium. And gameplay-wise, I think they've done a good job of it. It's fast, action-packed, a bit too easy perhaps, but varied and fun. So if you don't mind simplistic shooters, criminally bad acting, and are a fan of Star Wars, it's definitely one to track down. I'm nowhere near as experienced or knowledgeable in flight combat simulations as I am in, let's say, role-playing or turn-based strategy games. It doesn't mean that I didn't play them, just that I am an amateur and a Sunday pilot at best rather than well-versed and comfortable at them player. That preface aside, Su-27 Flanker on Windows is a very accurate and comprehensive simulation that's tackling a bit touchy today's subject, as it covers a variety of missions over Ukraine's Crimea region. But this channel is not about politics, so that's where I'll end the subject. The flying model is very solid, very true to life, and the game is simulation aficionado's dream, as it's challenging but also feels really rewarding. In fact, as it stands, Su-27 Flanker was apparently so realistic in its flight dynamic, crafts, inner workings, weapons and physics that it was used as a conversion trainer for real-life pilots. All the elements of your craft move as they do in real life when appropriate. So popping an air brake extends the little jack within, the rudders, the undercarriage and hydraulics all work as in real plane, and it's actually visually represented in the game too. It was mind-blowing for the time. And as far as I know, all the other enemy craft present in the game are remade with the same detail-oriented philosophy. The fact that there's simple yet powerful mission editor, including allowing you to modify existing and create entirely new missions, is just a cherry on Flanker's already over-sweetened pie. But do you know what's most important about all of it though? When you finally learn how to conquer the beast, how to fly it and not die instantly in an encounter, and how to turn it into the deadly machine it deserves to be, it becomes really fun. Cause then you can really feel as if you were there, inside the cockpit. I liked Flanker, but I sucked at it. But I can see and appreciate what it was capable of in the right hands. So, if yours are, don't waste your time listening to me and get the game and check it out. The 11th Hour is a sequel to earlier popular The Seventh Guest, and also a first-person horror mystery adventure. And most interestingly, it's a game that brought the bankruptcy of its developer, Trilobite Games. Reason being what you'd expect. The 11th Hour did not sell nowhere near as well as they hoped for. Oh well, such is life. The story takes us to the haunted mansion, where we play as Carl Denning, seeking our disappeared girlfriend Robin Morales, who mysteriously vanished while researching the haunted mansion of the once evil mastermind Henry Stauf. Oh, did I mention it that it's the same house as in the first game just years later? No? Then well, it is. So yeah. And it looks really good, meaning the devs really put attention to changing its appearance so that it would be clear that it's the same location, just in much worse, worn out state. Gameplay wise, the 11th Hour is not far off from its predecessor, and you once more will walk around the huge house watching creepy FMV sequences and solving logic puzzles. And they are demanding, even more so than in previous game. Some of them can actually take hours to figure out. Graphics are considerably much better than in the past, this time in high resolution, high color, adding to the feeling of creepiness and danger with all those fine gruesome details clearly visible on the screen. And the music and sounds are top notch too. So what went wrong? Well, despite all I just said, which seems to be superlatives only, simply put, it's not a great game. It's a-okay at best, and given that the horror adventure genre was already targeting a very small subset of all gamers, chances of it being popular vanished along with the spirit in the mansion itself. Boys and girls, we've got a good one. And it's Gabriel Knight 2 The Beast Within, a direct follow-up to earlier as good Sins of the Fathers. Gabriel Knight, our protagonist, officially a former bookstore owner, is really the last offspring of generations of so-called Schattenjägers, so shadow hunters whose task is to find and fight evil forces all around the world. After the events of the first game, Gabriel and his assistant Miss Grace Nakimura moved to Ritter Castle in Bavaria to his family's historical home, where Gabriel, based on initially seemingly simple case of a young girl killed by a wolf, must uncover and cleanse the mysterious Hunter Society and uncover Bavaria's dark past and secrets. While The Beast Within is a real full-fledged point-and-click adventure, it is also full of numerous FMV sequences that seem to trigger with most interactions. It is not just a simple and linear FMV game though, let's make this clear, and you'll have to bring your adventure A-game to complete it. Getting yourself accustomed with many characters, following long dialogue trees and learning from them, doing detective work, figuring out what, where, when and how happened, and solving many puzzles. Both Gabriel and Grace are playable characters in Beast Within during different alternating sections of the story. The game is a masterpiece of blood-chilling, suspenseful, well-told mystery that instantly became a benchmark of how games using FMV sequences should look, feel and play. And that the watching of said videos should not be used as a gameplay mechanic, but rather serve as a background, adding a lot to the ambience of the plot. I mean, Phantasmagoria we spoke about not so long ago was not a bad game, but compared to Sins of the Fathers, it's like a fast food joint leaflet compared to a good hardcover novel. That's how good Gabriel Knight 2 is. And if you're at all into adventure games, especially those that are on a more dark, heavier, mysterious side, you're not gonna be able to put this one down. The Incredible Machine 2, same as its predecessor, does not offer any real story, any world building, or even any reason to complete it, other than the Rube Goldberg contraptions galore in each of the game's more or less 200 levels. The gameplay idea is that simple. You're presented with a task, which is usually but not always something very basic, like get the ball into a basket, move the mouse to a particular place, or something akin to that, and a stage where some parts of the machine are already pre-assembled and unmovable. Be it platforms, fans, trampolines, whatever, it's irrelevant, as these are your framework upon which you need to add on others to complete the pre-assigned task. This is where the game drags you in, and doesn't let you go until you're either so tired that you need to go to sleep, or completed it in its entirety. Sounds stupid, I know, I too once was not a believer, but it's difficult to show within just an odd couple of minutes long video clip and a few words how addictive the Incredible Machine 2 is. On a side note, Incredible Machine 2 is also known as Incredible Machine 3.0, so you know, while the devs clearly knew how to make an amazing title, they had no clue how confusing this may be from a marketing point of view and for a potential buyer. Or they were geniuses banking on selling the same game twice and I'm the idiot here. Well, we'll never know. I mean, we do know that I'm not the sharpest tool, but that still does not clear the whole thing with games naming. Still, the Incredible Machine 2 is a marvel, and while first levels are beyond easy, allowing you to familiarize yourself with controls and study how many of the items that you can add to the quote-unquote machines work, the game will pose more and more demanding challenges for you as you go through it. And it's not always going to be giving you a more difficult task, as often it will just limit the number of kinds or things you can add to it. So you will have to think creatively out of the box and from time to time even approach a particular level more than once just to figure it out. And when you do, it's hella rewarding. And since Incredible Machine's graphics are very cartoony, it's an interesting title to the young as it is to those older. Alone in the Dark was incredibly popular series at the time and one of, if not the first in series of cinematic survival horror games. And cinematic is a keyword here, with three-dimensional real-time characters on pre-rendered backgrounds with camera angles switching to suit the location you're in. All that gave the game the movie-like feel and made it easier to immerse yourself in a story. It also made combat unnecessarily more difficult than it had to be, with often switching viewpoints and odd angles you were sometimes stuck in. And in a survival horror where combat along with adventure puzzling is all you really do, it's not a good design choice. That said, that design choice was also reason for game's popularity, so what do I know, who am I to question it, and most importantly, why am I talking about a different game than the one that you're watching? Well, I suppose you've noticed some similarities already. While Timegate is not a gory gothic horror title, it uses the same polished engine that the Alone in the Dark games did, uplifting graphics to SVGA and sound design considerably. That said, underneath it all, the same engine powers the little gears running the gaming machine, with all of its good and bad that we've just spoke about. This time, you're William Tibbs, American in Paris, whose girlfriend was kidnapped and taken through time to medieval France. Which, while not something you'd like to see, personally, I wouldn't mind a little one-on-one action with a time machine, just for shits and giggles, you know, to secure an odd billion or two for a more comfortable future. Anyway, you obviously have to find and rescue your love, and in process figure out what makes you resonate so intensely with a Knights Templar. Same as in Alone in the Dark, gameplay will circle around combat and adventure puzzling, and if you're a fan of the classic, you'll love Timegate too. If you weren't, it's hardly a game to change your mind. A renegade Soviet commander based in a remote secret location in Mexican desert is threatening to strike United States with chemical weaponry. What a start! Batman's a chemical threat to me too anytime he munches on anything with jalapenos. And we don't want that to happen, right? I mean, either fall of US and mine from Batman's toxic farts, right? So, given that as per usual Batman's on a mission of greater importance, this time if you're curious to check how many packages of chips a single person can eat before puking, he's at 23 now, but at least from where I'm sitting he doesn't look too good. He's red and there's that odd thick vein popping along his heartbeat on his forehead. Anyway, he's clearly not up for the task now. So, since he's unavailable, you're the one to save US once again. And I know for a fact that you're more than capable of doing so. Tomcat Alley is a FMV action shooter with an emphasis on the FMV and action relegated to short bits here and there. It was converted from Sega CD and sadly not much if any care at all was given to that conversion, because the videos are as grainy as they were in original. It's not to say that Tomcat Alley is a bad FMV game, not the case really, it's just not very polished, simplistically designed, serving same videos time after time again, just mixed in order, and plainly put, by 1995, not as good as games we had on our PCs already. So both Rebel Assault titles and Hive to name a few. Tomcat Alley can be fun for a single playthrough, and as such it's worth giving it a go. But I don't see anyone really playing it more than that. Torin's Passage is beautiful. If you put it next to Tomcat Alley we just spoke about and totally ignore the fact that they're entirely different games and will just want to compare them on their graphical design, Torin's Passage will blow the former FMV fiasco out of the water. The entire game feels like a high-budget cartoon or a Disney's movie, with incredibly detailed characters, colorful lush backgrounds, super smooth animations and tons of little clips depicting your choices and interactions with characters and objects. It's a visual treat unlike many and a game in a class of its own, at least presentation-wise. Let's talk about the gameplay though, as I think it's clear by now that I'm really impressed with how it looks. Torin's Passage is a humorous point-and-click adventure where you play as titular Torin, a young boy who one day finds his parents mysteriously imprisoned with a spell by an evil sorceress Lysantia. So you and your purple cat-like creature Boogle have to embark on a quest to find a way to break that spell and confront the villain. On your way you're not only going to discover your true origin and importance in the world, but will also witness your friend's magical awakening, as he will learn how to shapeshift into various objects, which coincidentally will be useful in solving many of the game's puzzles. And these are a healthy mix of inventory and environmental ones, with the earlier being in the most cases very basic, tedious even at times, and the latter requiring some thought put behind how to solve them. Al Lowe of Larry Laffer fame is responsible for Torin's Passage, assuring games high quality and omnipresent humor and hilarity. So, if you enjoy adventure games, this one's a no-brainer. Go and get it. And if you don't, it still may be worth checking out, as the quality of presentation may just sway you to complete it despite that. Now, it's not going to be an overstatement when I say that when it comes to fishing simulations, I'm out of my depth. It seems though that I'm still good at my cringe puns. Trophy Bus is just that, a fishing simulation. I don't fish, in reality that is, so my knowledge of what's involved in it is partly based on movies, partly on what I've heard from friends who do so, and partly on video games. From first of the three, I know that in movies they always catch the big fish, without fail. From second, that my friends always seem to consume obscene amounts of alcohol while doing so, and no one ever mentions fish after, so I'm not even sure that they manage to catch anything really, other than cold and hangover that is. And finally, from games I learned that if you don't know what you're doing, where to go, what gear to pick for a location chosen, and most importantly which lure for a particular fish, you're either gonna catch fish no bigger than the goldfish, or a case of growing boredom and restlessness. So, like I said, I don't fish and know very little about it. But from what I've gathered about our today's game online, I can tell you that Trophy Bus is pretty darn good. Mind you, I didn't play it myself. It allows you either to take part in Bassmasters tournaments, start a fishing career, or just free play on a chosen lake for leisure. Furthermore, it features encyclopedia quality set of content other than the gameplay itself that could teach you not only about all the ins and outs of fishing, but also give you hints and pointers what to do in certain troublesome to newbie situations. The graphics are quite decent too, and overall, apparently, the game feels like the next best thing when you cannot fish in real life. So, do as you wish with that knowledge and let me know if what I found about it is at all true. I love Marvel's comic book heroes, and even though I grew up with both, I prefer Marvel's to the ones from DC. I like that most of the comic books are set in real-world locations and that the characters all feel human, more or less. Meaning that they all have their personalities outside of being heroes, they have faults, they make mistakes, they are not perfect or written to fulfill one and one role only. Yeah, I'm looking at you, faultless, indestructible and perfectly boring Superman. What? Oh, no, I did not mean you, buddy. You're obviously the best. I mean, who can compare to the amazing man, but I mean Batman. Yeah, Batman. No one, that's who. Oof, that was a close one. Anyway, point is, I love Marvel, so being able to play a Marvel let alone Spider-Man themed game on my Windows PC back in the 90s 1990s was like a dream come true. It meant being able to hopefully relive what I read about in the comic books on the screen of my PC interactively. On a side note, that's also a reason why, regardless of the theme and genre, I generally speaking prefer games over movies and books, because they offer interactive experiences and not just a record of these in one format or another. I seem to be all over the place with this one today. So Venom and Spider-Man Separation Anxiety was just the title I dreamed of playing. It is loosely based on a Venom saga from comics and allows you to play as friendly neighborhood Spidey or his arch-nemesis Venom, because believe it or not, they've teamed up to defeat an evil orc that is trying to create 5 super soldiers using 5 of Venom's symbiote spawns. For all the intents and purposes, Separation Anxiety is a side-scrolling beat-em-up in which you can play alone as either of the protagonists or with a friend in co-op. They can punch, kick, swing on their spiderwebs or even perform few special moves, but these are not the easiest to pull off. As you go about the game annihilating bodies, you'll be able to pick up icons representing other Marvel heroes like Captain America, Hawkeye, Ghost Rider or Daredevil to name a few, and they can be later summoned to aid you in especially difficult situations. As beat-em-ups go, however, this one doesn't stick out from the thousands of better titles available in the arcades. Well, other than using Marvel characters and being playable at home, that is. So while it's a decent and fun with a friend game, it's far from genre's best, and also the game's progress is saved at very specific points, so if you die long after the last one of these and before the next, you may end up having to replay a few levels once more. Which, you know, is something that did not happen even in the arcades, and we all know how much these were customized towards milking customers for their money. All in all, Separation Anxiety will be a treat to fans of Spidey or superheroes in general, or beat-em-ups for that matter too. Others may very well just go ahead and ignore it. Virtual Pool was at the time probably the most comprehensive and realistic pool simulation out there. It was made in cooperation with a team of physicists and real-life professional pool players, and endorsed by Machine Gun Lou Batera, at the time world champion pool player. So you know, the foundation of an excellent title was there. Was the game good though? It was. It's really one of a kind at the time, incredibly close to life experience. Not only you get to play in full 3D with all the balls stable and physics simulated accurately, but you can also walk around the table to assess the situation on it and plan your next shot. You can view it from over the head and look both sides to line up your shots perfectly. It was, without a shadow of a doubt, the best pool game the year it came out in. It features 4 games of 8 ball, 9 ball, straight pool and rotation, and they all play according to professional rules. And if you don't know them, there's not only an online rules book available, that to be frank I'm not sure still exists today, but also extremely helpful tutorial and series of video lessons led by Machine Gun himself. You can play Virtual Pool against the CPU of varying skill levels or with a friend locally or online. It's excellent and it's as fun today as it was in 1995, if you like pool that is. Warhammer Shadow of the Horned Rat is a single-player fantasy real-time tactics 3D game based on Warhammer Tabletop and not unlike modern Total War series of games. You play as mercenary commander Morgan Bernhardt, and the story depicts a conflict with Skavens, intelligent humanoid rats. You're hired by various parties throughout the game to take part in battles against Skavens and help stopping their nefarious plot. And it's those tactical battles that are the main focus of the game, taking into account terrain, kinds, number of units and their placement too. It's a very enjoyable loop if you get a grasp of it and get used to the controls. You're controlling whole groups and not single units, and the gameplay is all but linear, meaning you get to pick alternate missions to progress, so repeated playthroughs are rarely the same. The units that make up your mercenary army are quite typical for the medieval fantasy genre, so cavalry, infantry, archers, artillery, magic users, specialized troops and so on. And they transfer from mission to mission with you, provided that they survive, that is. They also gain experience and get better over time, acquiring new skills in the process. For instance, magic users gain access to new, more powerful spells that can often turn the tide of the battle if used correctly. While the gameplay itself is varied and non-linear, campaign path is, and if you keep succeeding, certain story elements will repeat for all playthroughs. Given how fun and often tactically challenging some battles can be, the fact that some story elements repeat is definitely not a detractor from enjoyment of this really cool game. After each battle you're given a debriefing listing a rundown on number of enemies killed, losses incurred and experience gained by surviving troops. Losses can be in form of injuries, which only remove affected soldiers temporarily for a duration of one battle, or kills, which are permanent and dead soldiers can only be replaced between battles in town, with number of reinforcements fluctuating and not always available to cover all your losses. It goes without saying that replacing more experienced units is much more costly than that of rookies, so keep that in mind. Warhammer Shadow of the Horned Rat, despite terribly aged simple 3D graphics, is still a terrific game and a great fun to play, and I do mean it as someone who usually doesn't care about real-time strategies. Entomorph Plague of the Darkfall is the second game set in fictional world of Aiden and an indirect follow-up to earlier Thunderscape. It differs from the first game quite considerably though. It's more action-oriented and all the role-playing and puzzle-solving bits are more of an addition rather than the forefront of gameplay. You explore the island of Foros, overrun by aggressive insects called Jactera. What you don't realize, however, that these are not real and generally speaking peaceful domesticated Jactera, but former poor inhabitants of the land turned into vicious monsters by the nobles. There is however something clearly wrong in there that you know for sure and decide to take upon yourself not only to figure out what, but also stop the evil forces behind it. And to think that you came to Aiden only to find your sister. Who would have thought that you'll get yourself involved in such troubles? Oh well, such is life. Most of the gameplay consists of talking to various people, gathering clues and necessary items and venturing into hostile areas to fight the enemies, which you do either with magic or in hand-to-hand combat, cause there's no weaponry of any kind in entomorph, ranged or melee. You can however drink special potions that allow you to temporarily morph into various other creatures, gaining their skills and attacks in the process. These transformations come at a cost however. The more you use them, the faster you start turning into aforementioned Jactera, and this change is irreversible. So either refrain from doing so or go all in, the game ending will reflect your choices. Entomorph is closer to Diablo than a full-fledged role-playing, but only on the surface, as in reality it's straight up action game with some sporadic adventure bits mixed in. It features no statistics or experience whatsoever and you play it to learn all of its story and witness one of the endings. It's not a bad game, in fact it's pretty good, but not really my cup of tea. Bureau 13 is a computer adaptation of a tabletop role-playing game of the same title. It's not a role-playing game on PC though, but your standard point-and-click adventure. It's still pretty darn good, so don't hold the change against it. Or do, cause I'm not gonna tell you how to feel about it. And if you wanna be a 5-year-old and throw a fit cause it's not what you wanted it to be, even if it's really decent, then go ahead, be my guest. You know what? Do it in the comments below, so Batman and I can decide what to do with you. You with me on this, buddy? I'm Batman. Nice, I knew I could count on you. The titular Bureau 13 is a super-secret division of government agents that investigate and deal with otherworldly and supernatural events, all the while keeping their existence hidden from general public. Because what normies don't know, they don't fear, and what they don't fear, they're not prejudiced towards. Which is kinda important, especially that half of Bureau's employees are not human but vampires, ghosts and such. You know, it's a man in black with some Hellboy mixed in kind of an orc. You play the game as 2 agents that you can freely choose from available 6 and set choice will influence the entirety of your game, as not only they represent different classes and differ visually, but also have different skill set and strong and weak points. So all the puzzles you encounter may require using different approach and means to solve them. It's a fun concept that we've seen before in games like Maniac Mansion for instance, and it makes repeatable playthroughs viable, which is hardly a standard for adventure titles. The story starts slowly with you investigating a rogue agent who killed a sheriff in a small town, but quickly evolves into much bigger and deeper conspiracy that you will no doubt enjoy figuring out and experiencing on your own without me telling you all about it here. Especially that there's literally no random pixel hunting or trial and error puzzles in the game, and all will require you doing proper detective work, gathering clues and solving them using logic. It's a blast. But since there's always something that's not great, even in games as interesting as this one, it's the graphics here. They aged badly. Early 3D did not look particularly stunning in 1995 and Bureau 13 looks just awful today. So if you can overlook it, there's a fun game here. If you can't, then let's move on to the next title. Darkseid was a horror classic, a macabre story of our and another twisted dark world, intertwined with each other so different and yet so alike, and sported H.R. Giger's art rounding up that mysterious horror adventure as a very deep and terrifying story. Darkseid 2 sadly fails to live up to the expectations, and while being a decent point-and-click game, it's not as captivating as the original was. It takes place not long after the events of the first game and places you in shoes of original's protagonist Mike Dawson once more. Dark forces once again messed with poor Mike's life. His high school sweetheart Rita has been found murdered in his hometown where he was recovering from the events of the first game. And while he cannot recall anything from the night she's been killed, many witnesses claim to have seen him with her. So now, being the prime suspect, he must travel between our and Dark World to prove his innocence. The graphics of Darkseid 2 are considerably better than the first game, all in photorealistic high resolution and with fine detail in each of 75 in-game locations, adding to the drama that the game's story is. But with that change also came some improvements, as you will no longer need to hunt for pixel-in-size objects on the screen and all the ones that can be of any interest to you are usually clearly visible. Even if it's not as good as the first game was, Darkseid 2 is still a worthy endeavor if you're into either point-and-click or horror games. Thus, The Tale of Wired West is a first-person point-and-click adventure unlike most others. Not only it takes place in a small Wild West town of Diamondback, but you also play as an unnamed stranger who just got into it and learned that it's riddled with countless troubles. From having no sheriff, through forcibly displaced Indian tribe, bounty hunters tracking a disappeared poker player, murder, all the way to the lost treasure and problems with a local pyrite mine. And that's just the beginning of it. On top of that, you have your own shadow chasing you in the form of a villain named The Kid. It's a Wild West clichés galore, am I right or am I right on this one? Let me know in the comments below. Dust truly is a Western fan's wet dream, but what it also is incredibly varied in gameplay that it offers. Not only you can point and click through hundreds of puzzles, but most of them have more than one solution that will progress the story in a different way, offering varying tidbits of the life on the frontier and leading to the endgame by different paths. And the dialogues, oh my days, I hope you like reading, cause there's a lot of them. And they're not just a mindless jabber, there's actually a lot you can learn from them, and they add to the backstory of everything that's plaguing the town. Sounds fun? Good. But wait, cause there's more. I love to use those stupid-ass commercial-like bits. I'd apologize for them, but you're most likely used to my quote-unquote style now, and learned to ignore them. Anyway, there are also action sequences in a game in the form of few gunfights, and while they're not what most adventure fanatics would like to see in their games, they're fun, even if a bit difficult. You can train for them, however, to prepare, so if you do, they should not pose too big of a challenge. Overall, Dust feels like a personal Western movie in which you can not only participate, but also influence the outcome of. So if you love to watch those, or adventure games in general, it should be a blast for you. Not all FMV games are made same. Some are terrible, borderline games at all, while others are decent. And between those last, few and far between, there are little gems that are genuinely good. Frankenstein Through the Eyes of the Monster is one of these. It's a first-person point-and-click adventure where you play as Dr. Frankenstein's monster. But is he a monster at all? Well, you'll soon to find out, if you play the game that is. Story-wise, you've been falsely accused of a murder and executed. Dr. Frankenstein, played by the talented and incredibly well-casted here Tim Curry, found a way to bring you back to life. Changed, sure, no doubt about that, but back nonetheless. So he did just that, and when you woken up, your goal became clear. To figure out what happened, what was Dr. Frankenstein's role in it if any, and will you be able to come back to your former life? Well, I think we can all guess the answer to at least one of these. Anyway, the appropriately creepy vibe of Frankenstein's castle, when you roam it, searching for clues and solving puzzles, is omnipresent, and dark and mysterious feeling never leaves your side. The castle itself is rather large, in places maze-like in its design, and offering many mostly mechanical and logic-based puzzles to lure you in and not let you go until you finish this little gem. Tim Curry is as good as you'd expect him to be, but as the game progresses, his presence is less and less important for the story and more used as a source of hints really, which feels a bit like a wasted opportunity. That said, whenever he's on the screen, he's acing it, so it's always fun to have him pop up for a minute here and there. The rest of the cast, however, is rather weak and feels like a group of background or in the best case B-movie actors gathered all together and working for a cup of noodle soup and a crate of beer only. They don't shine, but there's not many of them, so it's not something that will pull you out of experience too often. The puzzles are not overly difficult, and most gamers should be able to figure them out without having to resort to online walkthroughs. Overall, Frankenstein Through the Eyes of the Monster feels like a win, with interesting and captivating story, excellent even if sometimes crampy performance from Tim Curry, and solid but not punishing puzzles. Adventure game fans should definitely track it down, it's a definition of a hidden gem. Grand Prix Manager, as the title may have gave it away, is a Formula 1 racing team manager. And as these not very often seen games go, this one's excellent. Sure, it's a bit dated by today's standards, but back then, there was no better. You can play it for up to 40 years of in-game time, and your goal is obviously to have your team be as best as it's possible and win-win-win. So you'll be responsible for everything, all of the day-to-day operations, and you'll even need to hire necessary staff, from engineers through mechanics and designers all the way to marketing and drivers. The best picks will obviously yield higher chances at your success. While all that sounds simple and straightforward like a direct recipe for winning, it's hardly that. All because you're working within your budget constraints, and being able to hire some of the best in any of the categories will take a while. Sure, your marketing staff may negotiate a better deal with advertisers, giving you a little bit more wiggle room when it comes to spending, but it will take a lot of time for you to be able to afford the best of the best. Engineers, mechanics and designers are responsible not only for preparing your car for the race day and keeping it in tip-top form, but also for research and development of new parts, driver aids and new chassis. It's a struggle. But it's a fun struggle, so at no point in game you'll actually feel like dropping it. Drivers, well, I think we all know what they do, they splash the champagne and keep winning races. Or not, cause, you know, it's a machine and they're just a small gear in it all. If you have at the very least passing interest in either Formula 1 or management games, preferably both obviously, then you should have hell of a time playing Grand Prix Manager. Johnny Mnemonic, William Gibson's short story, and Keanu Reeves' movie are both amazing, each in their own right. Today's game, also called Johnny Mnemonic, is really not. It has all the makings of an excellent FMV title, and is a rare few and far between, as you know, so really good and interesting story, excellent source material to base that story off, full screen video sequences, in fact easily over 2 hours of this, and sci-fi theme which more often than not is a guarantee for success for audiences of most ages. What it does not have, however, and it breaks the whole game really, is fun, non-linear gameplay and lack of tedious repeatable action sequences. In fact, it's unfortunately chock full of these. So the 2 hours of video will be stretched to serve multiple short clips repeated time after time again, as you battle through particular difficult action sequence. And since the controls are just horrendous, you'll be repeating parts of the game knowing very well that your failure was not entirely your fault, or at all even. And that feeling is what may drive many gamers to just drop the game entirely. Because while most of us are happy to get better, to train to overcome our limitations and learn the ins and outs of a particular game, we are not happy when the roadblocks stopping us from progress are badly thought out controls. Anyway, you play as the titular Johnny Mnemonic, who is carrying more data in his head than it's capable of holding, and the data leakage may kill him if not unloaded soon enough. Same as in a movie. And you also control his bodyguard Jane, who will be taking part in most combat sequences. The game is first-person FMV adventure that's 90% boring as action sequences, intertwined with 10% of adventuring and puzzling bits, that serve only to advance the plot. Being the fan of the movie and sci-fi in general, I wanted to like this game, I really did. But I feel everything that's lacking is just a bit too much, even for most hardcore fans of the genre, and I doubt that anyone will find much to enjoy in it. Mordor, The Deaths of Daedalus, no relation to Tolkien's Mordor, is easily my most favorite game of 1995, and in my top 20 of all time. Yes, that's how good it is. And yes, it's an incredibly robust title that's nearly infinitely replayable, and very difficult to explain. And even more so, explain in a way that would prevent me from skipping anything that it offers, cause all of it is important in one way or another. I'm sure that I will, cause it's probably the biggest small game that I've ever spoken about. What do I mean by big small game? Well, it's feature-rich, nay, abundant, all the while having very basic, even awful to some presentation. It looks as if it was made in 15 minutes, when in fact, when you immerse yourself in it, it feels as if hundreds if not thousands of hours went into its creation. Oh man, I already feel that this is going to be a tough one to tackle. So let's start where the story starts, in City of Daedalus, under which old dwarven mines lay. Abandoned for years, eventually collapsed in one of the lower floors, opening the passage for monsters to pour out of and terrorize the city. So it was decided that the mines needed to be permanently shut down, and that's exactly what they were for decades. Eventually, however, city elders proclaimed that they should reopen, and adventurers were hired to clear them out. This quickly fell to what lived within, and a new bunch of young 16-year-old trainees was tasked with exploring and clearing the dungeon. And you're one of such young adventurers. Or two, or three, or four for that matter, cause you can actually form a party in Mordor. And you should, really. As playing the game with just one character is more directed towards advanced players who've ventured the depths of Daedalus for at least few hundred hours and know at least a bit how game's inner mechanics work and how they intertwine with each other. And yes, you've heard that right, hundreds of hours. When you start the game, same as with most dungeon crawling RPGs, you have to create your party of characters. So pick the name, and that's where the easy part of the game ends. Cause even picking a class is tough. Many of them are race or alignment locked, so you'll have to pick those appropriately, but most importantly some are stats locked. You will notice while playing that you cannot pick certain classes whatever you do here. And believe it or not, that's by design, because some classes you can only switch to after hours of playing and leveling a character in one of the basic ones. There's no other way of obtaining them. Even more so, classes have their proficiency levels, which you can raise by fulfilling guild quests. Because of course that there's guilds in Mordor, and there's many more of these than in any game old or new that you've played to date. Naturally, mixed class builds here are very robust and powerful if you manage to learn the game after sinking countless of hours in it, that is. All to be able to create those. It's worth noting at this point, still in Creator, that certain gear items, be it weapon or armor, may have stat requirements, and same goes for spells. So you will, without a shred of a doubt, fail at Mordor at least few times before realizing how to build a good starter character. But it's part of the fun. It's not a game for a Sunday role-playing fan, it's for someone who loves depth in their games and likes to learn all that there is about them, to eventually aim for min-maxing of stats. Racial stats that are shown in the creator can be extended, and you can eventually go over the max by even up to 5 points. Characters, while all starting at 16, depending on the race, have different lifespans, and if killed and resurrected or lost in a dungeon, they may lose years of their life, and it's not unusual to witness your favorites die of old age. And they will, as like I said, mastering Mordor is a full-time job. But one you can actually enjoy and learn from. Or is it just me that I'm not happy where I am in my life employment-wise? Oh well, let's move on. When you've done with creating your characters, the game will ask you for a password, which you can ignore. It's a feature that was implemented as devs expected the game to be played by many different players on the same PC sharing the same dungeon. And yeah, they do. So more often than not, if there's more of you playing, you may actually find in dungeon a body of another player who died there before. And you can do both. Loot it, because of course you need the gear and gold more than the dead guy does, or bring it back to town to resurrect it. And honestly, it's a feature that I mostly use to recover my own great fallen adventurers with a group of new ones, just to bring it back to default once more and complement my new party with it. Anyway, onward we go. Your party starts in City of the General. On first glance, there's not a lot there: general store, morgue, guilds, dungeon, confinement, seer and bank. But as the game goes, you learn how big in content these few locations are and how often you'll be coming back to town and using them. Let me give you a quick rundown of what they are. General store allows you to buy and sell items, simple as that. Items will change in time and they have various ranks of quality, alignment requirements, and can be magical too, which is something you learn playing quite quickly, so I'm not giving it an in-depth look here. But what we will talk about are the other things you can do in the store, namely uncurse items. Cause while you're traveling, you may decide to equip a powerful new weapon or armor piece that you found, just to learn that it was cursed, affects your stats negatively, and you cannot just take it off. So you have to uncurse it first in town. Then there's combine items option, which, well, as it says, allows you to combine certain items to get better ones. It's more of a mid-game thing, so you'll likely not use it for hours. And finally, you can identify unknown items to check if they're cursed or magical, and if they are the latter, then what bonuses they actually offer. Realigning the items changes their alignment for characters to be able to use them. It looks simple, but there's a lot of depth here. In Morgue, you can raise fallen heroes for a price, obviously, and at a risk, but you'll be doing this quite often, so you'll master it in no time, because in Mordor, it's really not unusual to venture into dungeons with 4 heroes and come back with just a couple, carrying the other fallen two back to have them resurrected. It's a cycle of life. No, scratch that. Batman, remove that please in editing, I wanna try again. Thanks. It's a cycle of dungeon crawling. The guilds allow you to level up in your particular chosen class, fulfill guild quests and join other guilds if your stats allow you to. And while initially after hours of grinding for one guild, switching to another may feel like you've lost a lot of your oomph, your power, it's only temporary, as if you manage to raise it up to the similar level you were in previous one, you will benefit from having both and will ultimately be stronger than you would have been just joining one. It's worth noting that there's no limit to how many you can join other than the stats requirement and your character's age. Confinement is an unusual part of town. At first it's not very populated, but it will change the more you play the game. It's where you can quote-unquote buy companions, sell them, and identify those that joined you on your adventures. Because yes, some creatures, seeing your undoubtedly overwhelming mind cause you're you so amazing, or them just not being aggressive whatsoever, may ask to join you in dungeons. These are not human companions, they are just creatures of various kinds, big and small. They have certain alignment requirements, so for instance your good heroes won't be able to hire evil companions, and only those that are neutral are also good. The Seer's primary use is to hustle you out of your money. I'm obviously kidding, but he is expensive. At some point when you level up in the guild, you're going to receive a quest from your guild master to defeat a certain enemy to be able to progress further. It's an exam of sorts. You have to find and defeat a particular monster, you see. They are usually, but not always, something you should be able to tackle, but the problem is not their strength, but where they might be. Cause you can either search for them when you've seen them last, if you remember where it was that is, and if the dungeon repopulated and rolled for the same kind of an enemy, which is not always the case. Or you can go to Seer, pay him obscene amounts of money to detect where the monster was last seen. He will give you a general idea of the flora and location, and more often than not the monster is there somewhere. Not always though, so while it's advisable to use Seer's services when you have money to burn, when you don't, it may be smart to walk around on your own looking for it first. And hopefully earning some money in the process too. Bank, as you might have guessed, being the brilliant potato that you are, is where you can store items and money that you don't want to lose in the dungeon. They are lost when your character dies or a creature or monster can just straight up steal them from you. because yes, both enemies and you can steal from each other provided you have skills to do so. It's a good practice to always keep at least enough money in a bank to be able to resurrect your whole party. The price of resurrection changes depending on number of times an adventurer was brought back, where he died and his level, so adjust your savings accordingly. There is also a highlighted character stats sheet showing any and all details about it, a party information screen in which you can highlight individual characters to check their stats out or perform actions or tasks in town as them. Oh, and it's worth remembering that the first 2 characters out of the 4 are in the front line, and the last 2 are in the back. It's especially important for casters and ranged weapon users not to be in the front of a party, as they're not damage sponges in any way imaginable. Objects and spells window allows you to prepare and equip items and spells on your character, and is something you'll be using constantly as your adventure progresses. Finally, Dungeon takes you straight into the entrance of the first of 15 levels of the Undercity dungeon. You might think that 15 is not a lot, but trust me, given that Mordor offers more than 400 different creatures and 366 different items to find, equip and use, it's not a short or simple game. Underground, your city interface disappears and instead you get a dungeon view, with a small square window showing your first-person perspective of where you're at, a larger area to the right of it that will and does display all the enemies in particular group that you're fighting against, and an auto minimap that is your best friend in a whole wide world of Mordor, as it will map for you all the drops, speed and rotating traps, random teleporters, doors, stairs, everything that's needed on your adventure. The first few to a dozen of hours is as much about exploration as it is about survival, and it's in your best interest to do what you can not to die. It is easier said than done, cause everything that lives in the dungeon seems to be bent on killing you. It seems that it's good time for another Mordor lesson, kids. So if you see that you may not be up to a task of defeating a certain enemy or are low on health deep in the dungeon, it's best to direct yourself towards the city ASAP rather than risk it all. Cause if you die in the dungeon and have no other characters to bring your fallen heroes, you have to wait for someone to find you. And it can take anything from few days to months, which obviously adds this time to your character's age, and resurrection of that kind is much more expensive than the one in town. Same goes for poison or any other statuses that may eat up on your health points. The game is in real time, so if you're affected by them, running back to town is not only smart but also a suggested solution and nothing to be ashamed of. Battle happens automatically in melee. If you want to use spells, however, you have to pick and cast them yourself. Fortunately, killed monsters stay just that. So dead, at least for a little while before the dungeons are repopulated, so usually backtracking is not a big issue. Especially that you need to come back to town to level up anyway. You can collect only as much experience in the dungeon as it is required to grab the next level, and enough for one more after that, short of 1 experience point. So basically nearly whole 2 levels, at which point you become so-called pinned and don't earn any experience anymore and have to come back to town to level up. Consider the first dungeon level as your tutorial. There's a decent spread of various monsters in it, teaching you what to expect from Mordor. Some steal, some are invisible and may require a spell or someone who actually sees invisible creatures to kill them easier, some are resistant to one type of damage or another, but generally speaking they're not too demanding. From second floor onward though, the game becomes serious and you can often expect a proper challenge. So I suggest mapping the entire first level before traveling onward, not only to level up as much as possible and prepare for what's ahead, but also to learn how the game works. I'm gonna do you a solid here with a tiny spoiler of sorts, so if you wanna avoid it, I'll chapter it for your convenience so that you can skip it. In the far left of the first level there's a hidden teleporter in 1x1 room that will randomly teleport you to a place on another, deeper floor where you will most likely die as soon as you meet any enemy, so avoid that room until you feel more comfortable playing. Defeated enemies often leave chests behind, and some of these may be trapped, so it's good to have someone in your party who can actually detect and disarm traps, and also a caster who can open magically locked chests. Mordor is a ginormous game, one of the biggest to come out in 1995. It may not feel like it as you map out the first dungeon level, but more you play, the quicker you realize that the deeper you go into dungeons, the more strategic and less all-out attack your approach should become. You might have noticed by now that aside from general reasoning for your entering the dungeon, I've said nothing about the story. You didn't? Oh well, perhaps you need a couple more visits to Guild to level up your perception, huh? Anyway, the story is basically non-existent. You play Mordor to play Mordor. It's a dungeon crawling adventure of epic proportions where you try to get to the bottom floor and complete it, while min-maxing your builds to be able to even attempt it. It's an amazing little game. Yes, little, it's like a few megs in size only, which will undoubtedly fill your life with hundreds if not thousands of wasted hours, dying time after time again, learning what to improve for the next run. It's my favorite game of 1995 and one of the faves out of all games I've ever played. Couple years later, a sequel Mordor 2 was planned and then cancelled, and eventually re-released with improved full 3D graphics in 2000 as Demise Rise of the Kutan. It's also an incredible game, but I don't feel as much melancholy towards it as I do for Mordor. In the end, Mordor is a 1 in 1,000 game. Deep, challenging, and most importantly fun. And what it lacks in presentation, it more than makes up for in playability. A true hidden gem, if there ever was one. Quest for Fame, aka Rockbuster, is a Guitar Hero-like game, years before the series even emerged from infinite and bottomless pool of yet unsurfaced game design ideas. The game came with a so-called V-pick that could be used against nearly any surface to simulate real pick hitting real guitar strings. A step above the air guitar, if you will. It was a very novel concept at the time, and looking at it now, it seems like a lot of fun. Sadly, I never got to experience it personally, so I can't vouch for it, I'm afraid. But the idea itself was quite interesting. You'd start at the very bottom, playing in your own garage, to eventually get better and start showing off your skills in the clubs, to finally work your way all the way to the very top and complete the game playing the concert in huge-ass stadium as Aerosmith's lead guitar. While getting used to the V-pick apparently takes a minute, it seems that when you do, it feels like a second nature rocking it out, especially on a tennis racket. There are however also downsides to this otherwise cool sounding game, namely number of songs and access to them. There's only 7 Aerosmith tracks to play and master, and for a pretty big chunk of the early to mid game you only have access to the 3 of these. I suppose it's some kind of a progression system that was clearly not as perfected and well thought out as the gameplay formula itself was. In the same time, it was not annoying enough to detract from playing. Kinda like Batman's employment here. Initially we agreed that he'd edit the videos and upload them, and in exchange I'll let him crash on my couch from time to time and occasionally grab something from the fridge. And it also progressed to him basically living here, couch quickly became his quote-unquote office, and fridge is being emptied on a daily basis. And I'm at work 8 hours a day plus commute, so if it's not him, then who else would it be? Santa? I don't think so. He's not been here for a few good years now. Sid Meier's CivNet is basically first civilization with multiplayer capabilities and running under Windows. There's no other difference between them whatsoever. But what is civilization? Cause you won't know only if you happen to spend last 30 years under the rock, in a coma, or studying with monks in the mountains of Tibet, learning the meaning of life, or training to become the next Man-Bat. Sid Meier's Civilization is not only one of my most favorite series of games, but this first installment, despite gamers' personal preferences, is arguably one of the 10 top most important games in the whole history of gaming. Until now, that is when you asked about it, I didn't think there was anyone who haven't heard about it, or at least had a passing knowledge about the game. But since you did, and don't say now that you didn't cause you heard yourself asking about it, I'll try my best to explain. The simplest way of describing what civilization is to try to comprehend the encompassing meaning of the word itself. Because that's what the game is. It tells a story, or more appropriately, you design with your action and choices the story of your own nation. From prehistoric times to the future through all the eras in between. So you'll build and expand cities, deciding what buildings and units should be produced in them. You'll exploit natural resources, expand into wider areas, explore the unknown, and finally, exterminate any and all enemies if need arises. Or for fun, cause that's also a viable option in Civilization. On top of that, you'll also be directly involved in deciding how your nation's technological progression should look like. You'll directly control all units, both during war and in peaceful time, and you'll be the one who'll lead your people to glory. Or failure. If any of that sounds interesting to you, you owe yourself to try this gem of a game, and since First Civilization is the easiest in the series, it's an ideal gateway drug to that just one more turn disease that so many of us suffer from to this day. And there's no cure on the horizon, I'm afraid. Same as CivNet, short of multiplayer options, Windows' version of Sid Meier's Colonization is the same game we got a year earlier for DOS, but running on Windows. On the first glance, Colonization looks like a very basic reskin of Civilization, but the fact that it uses similar tile-based engine is the confusing factor here, as despite some unquestionable similarities, it's an entirely different game. For starters, it doesn't start in prehistoric era and only covers a short chunk of history, namely colonization period of North America. Then it focuses more on trade, training and hiring of skilled workers for various shops, rather than research of new units and buildings. And finally, it also tackles subjects of contacts, relations and cooperation with the natives and old world forces that want to keep their stronghold on this new one by any means necessary. It's also a tale of struggle for independence, for freedom and final conflict with British forces. I wouldn't say that it tells the story of conquest of the New World as it really was, but as a background for an interesting strategy game, it works great. And it never aimed to be 100% accurate anyway, so little differences can't be held against it. Still, despite all those differences, it is not an overstatement to say that Colonization is a game that Civilization fans would not only be able to start playing comfortably, understanding the underlying concepts and controls from the get-go, but also offering comparable and equally as enjoyable gameplay loop. In the end, Colonization is a title worth having and being played by any true strategy aficionado, or even someone who was interested in Civilization but wary of its obvious complexity. I remember Stars being touted by one of the gaming mags of yesteryears as a game that even Bill Gates played religiously. I mean, if he did, it had to be good, right? Especially that it was supposed to be this 4X Master of Orion-like title, giving you unprecedented freedom in ways you could win each game. And the fact that it can be played by up to 16 real or CPU players was especially enticing to me. Not that I had 15 friends on the edge of their seats just waiting to play Space Team strategies with me or even interested in games really. But despite that, I was still keen on this particular option for whatever the reason that I can't recall today. To this day, I have no idea if Bill really played it, or was it just a review fluff, something that was not easy to fact check back then, but it was plausible enough to be used as a quote-unquote factoid to insert and spice up game description. If by any chance you're watching this, Bill, Bruce and I are big fans. Please let me know if you played it or not. Still, whether he did or did not, I know for a fact that Batman and I did. I'm Batman. What? Yep. Okay. Correction. Manbat did not play it, because apparently he plays games featuring him and for whatever the reason Barbie exclusively. So do whatever you feel like with this knowledge. Anyway, Stars is a 4X top-down turn-based sci-fi space strategy of massive depth that's coupled with friendly and easy-to-grasp Windows-based interface. And I spent quite a bit of time playing it back then. It's a title that will not seduce you with its flashy presentation, catchy soundtrack or buttersmooth animation. Quite the opposite. It looks and sounds so simple in fact that it could be considered bare-bones Excel sheet wannabe, with a lot of numbers, graphs and incredibly simplistic graphical objects to depict your fleets, planets and such. While it may be off-putting at first and sounds boring when I talk about it too, I'm sure, don't let it fool you. The gameplay is all there, and if you manage to get someone else to play it with you, it's also addicting as hell. Why do I mention other players in particular? Well, Stars is a great game, no doubt about that, fun when played alone too, and it's about as big as some of those Instagram influencers sport, just hanging there and unnaturally changing their center of gravity. But regardless of the CPU difficulty level you choose, you will soon enough encompass it and learn how to win the game every single time. So having a friend or even better few of these eager to play Stars is what will prolong its stay quite considerably. Sadly, last time I've played it was over 25 years ago or so I can't really share any useful strategies or tips with you, but they wouldn't really work against humans anyway, as we tend to be unpredictable and adjust our approach to situations on the fly, rather than follow a certain pre-programmed algorithm. All in all, Stars is a very deep and time-consuming game that will no doubt provide you with days of fun when played against the CPU, or weeks against friends. While the Daedalus Encounter is definitely not the first interactive movie game we've spoken on this channel, and not even first I've ever played, it is the first I remember seeing in a gaming mag before I even had a chance to experience any titles in the genre. And I don't know if it was the setting the premise gameplay is based on, or lovely Mystia Carrera, but I was really interested in it. Mind you, while I did not have a PC yet and was still destroying joysticks on my trusty Amiga, I was just a few months away from getting one and was carefully scouting PC gaming scene, forming a list of titles old and new that I wanted to get and play when I finally would be able to. Now, since I make those videos, you can bet your ass that the list was already a few hundred titles long, and I went through dozens of my old mags picking all the games I looked at with envy and couldn't experience on the Ami. Now, Daedalus Encounter was quite a new one at this point, and the whole FMV interactive movie genre seemed very exotic to me, not being able to fathom how it's even played. Little did I know that grand majority of these were incredibly superficial, lacked deep or even fun gameplay mechanics, and just drowned you in the sea of repeatable, boring and low quality clips. But I was to learn that soon enough, so it's probably for the best that I had something to get excited about for my new computer. The Daedalus Encounter fortunately is not one of those crappy FMV games, and while it's not the best this limited genre could offer, it's genuinely good and worth completing. The game starts a little after the intergalactic war ended, during which you died. Only, not really. Because when you woke up from seemingly blacking out, you realize that you're just a disembodied brain in a life support system box, rescued from a suspicious lab by a former war teammate later. You know, Futurama head style. Anyway, they hook you up to their ship, which now functions kinda like your body, keeping you alive and allowing you to interact with all of its systems and your friends. The gameplay mainly involves you passively witnessing what they do, how they explore alien locations, conversing with them and trying to help them solve various puzzles. in majority of cases consisting of figuring out how to operate different mechanisms to open locked doors and areas or to push the story forward. Even if this sporadic puzzle solving is not the worst, it's hardly a guarantor of long-lasting fun, and I wouldn't suggest approaching the Daedalus Encounter just for the puzzles. Where it shines is the acting and a pretty decent story. The first, while not on blockbuster levels, it's still few steps above the usual for the genre, and the plot is captivating enough to have you wanting to see it all the way through to the end. So should you play it? Well, if anything I said sounded interesting, then you have your answer. The Last Dynasty is an excellent example of how to correctly utilize FMV sequences to make the game better and not to cripple it by basing everything that it offers just on them, especially when in most cases they are either mid to low in quality or heavily deep in cringe. And while the Last Dynasty's videos are not different, they are not used as means of gameplay but to complement the story, to add background and to push the plot forward. Everything else, the entire interactivity really, is done completely without them. And you know what? That's good. And if more devs back then realized that we did not need interactive movies per se, but just some digitized motion graphics here and there to add to the presentation, perhaps the genre would be alive and kicking today. Sure, there are a few outliers even today that heavily lean on full motion videos, games like Late Shift and Her Story, but that's it. Other than these, there are really no good titles representing once on the rise genre released today at all. On a side note, these two are excellent, but that's a subject for another video. The Last Dynasty is a mixture of fast-paced action shooter in vein of Wing Commander with first-person point-and-click puzzle adventuring similar to Myst. And yes, despite how odd of a pairing it may seem to be, it's actually working well together and is fun. And believe it or not, but the video sequences are only used to tie it all together. It's a marvel. Even more so, neither of the two game modes feels as if it was quickly put together just to add to the content to have something to show to gamers. No, both are full fleshed out. Combat is rather fast-paced and exciting, offering many different ships to fly and fight against, 4 distinct weapons and a whole plethora of various situations you'll find yourself in the endless, dark and terrifying vacuum of space. Even more so, your ship's cockpit is entirely customizable, so you can pick exactly what is displayed and accessible at all times, to suit your playstyle. Was that necessary in a game like The Last Dynasty? No, it wasn't, but this kind of thought put behind every little detail and that extra mile here and there made it an exceptionally enjoyable, even if not really spectacular game. Adventuring parts see you exploring a station in beautiful 3D pre-rendered environments, finding and using objects, solving puzzles and uncovering details of the captivating plot. You play as Mel Rogue, an intergalactic hero who is tasked with finding and stopping the universal villain stupidly named Lord Iron. And that is precisely what you will do. Do we understand each other? Good. Let's jump to our next game then. Some games don't need to be overly complicated or overflowing with features to be fun. They're good enough when all gameplay mechanics are all set and in place, and Twisted Minigolf is just that. It doesn't try to reinvent the wheel, it doesn't aim to be the best game in existence. It's a simple, straightforward title that does everything right, not straying off too far from traditional minigolf roots. Up to 4 players can compete on a single system, and it features 5 different courses of 9 holes each. They are Easy as 1 to 3, 4 Winds, Imagination, Wargames and Waterworks. And even those names alone tell you more or less what you can expect in each of the courses. The controls are rather simple, just the way they're supposed to be in a minigolf game, so you drag the mouse with a button pressed in an opposite direction to where you want the ball to go, and release the button for a shot. The bigger the distance between the cursor and the ball, the higher the shot power. The courses feature various environmental obstacles and objects to either avoid or in some cases take advantage of, and they can be anything from raised surfaces, through conveyor belts and spinners, all the way to the moving walls. And that's just some of those that you'll encounter if you decide to give the game a chance. They are however introduced at gradual pace as you're playing, so at no point you'll feel overwhelmed by unknown dangers. As most games that allow for multiplayer play, Twisted Minigolf is best enjoyed with, or rather against friends, and even though it's sporting incredibly basic presentation, it's a blast to play even to this day. Woodruff and the Schnibble of Asimov, aka The Bizarre Adventures of Woodruff and the Schnibble, is not only the longest titled game in this video, but also probably the game that may seem to you like something you might have seen before. And if it does, then you're not wrong, as Woodruff was made by Cocktail Vision, the very same responsible for hilarious Goblin series of point-and-click adventure games. And Woodruff is one of those two. It takes place on Earth, long after it was annihilated by the devastating nuclear wars. So long in fact that while the surviving humans moved underground, a new race of humanoid so-called Buzooks populated the surface, building a fully functional civilization. When humans eventually emerged from their vaults, they did what they do best. And no, it's not living peaceful and prosperous life in balance with nature and newfound friends, the Buzooks. Nope. they waged war against Buzooks, quickly overwhelming and enslaving them in the process. Years later, sympathetic to the oppressed Buzooks' case, Professor Asimov discovered a mysterious object called the Schnibble, and it is apparently capable of bringing peace and prosperity to all inhabitants of the planet. Now, as current and, to be frank, past history as well has taught us, humans, so us, are not very peaceful, and certain individuals will always aim to get as much power and wealth as possible. Why do I preach all that? Well, the villain of the game, so-called Bigwig, sent off his goons to kidnap Professor Asimov because he was the one who craved for mentioned power and wealth more than anything else. You play as Woodruff, Asimov's adopted half-Buzook son, and you're not gonna rest till you get your father back. Woodruff's graphics is in the same exact over-the-top cartoony style that the Goblins were, and plays similarly too. But it's much bigger and more expansive title featuring a large and heavily populated city that you can explore freely, eventually, because initially you're restricted to much smaller area. To leave it, you will have to learn to read and find appropriate footwear. And if that sounds ridiculous, prepare, because both Woodruff and Goblins were known for the hilarious situations and very specific absurd humor, which Woodruff serves by the bucket. Most puzzles are inventory based and sadly even more trial and error than those in Goblins were, but at least expect to watch plenty of fun little animations when you pick incorrect items to use on objects they're not supposed to be used on. Sure, you may have preferred more logic-based gameplay, but at the very least you get to indulge yourself in tons of short hilarious skits that may not push the story forward, but add a lot to the atmosphere. Woodruff is hella fun, if you're in the right mindset that is. And even more so if you like a little unpredictability in your games. My absolute favorite genre are role-playing games with tactical turn-based combat. Cause I like to build my character, or even better characters, throughout a long and eventful campaign, min-maxing their stats and coming out with interesting or even unstoppable builds. Allied General is not an RPG. It is however a sequel to Aerial Panzer General and a turn-based tactical strategy, and these are quite high on my list of faves too. Allied General takes place during World War II, again, but this time on Allied side during 2 British, 1 US and 1 Russian campaigns. Remember when these 3 were allies? Seems like ages ago. Anyway, the campaigns are set in Europe, Russia and North Africa, and while Allied General is strategy through and through, there are some small tiny things that you get to find in RPGs in it, like experience and unit progression. So units that survive a combat encounter and transfer to the next mission and receive experience points. It obviously reflects in units' usefulness and efficiency. The change may not be astronomical, but you know, every little helps, right? Anyway, the campaigns, while largely linear, are not really make or break type of affairs, so losing some missions does not really end up with a game over, but with a change of situation on a global scale of conflict. All sides may have different units and all of them have their own strengths and weaknesses and specific use case scenarios, kinda like Batman and Man-Bat. One lives on my couch, eats my food, sweet and savory snacks, and drinks my, well, drinks, doing little to no work at all. While the other lives on my couch, eats my food, sweet and savory snacks, and drinks my, well, drinks, doing little to no work at all. Wait a minute. Are you editing these videos in the way that would make me look stupid, Bruce? I'm Batman. What? What do you mean more stupid? Anyway, interestingly enough, user interface elements change their aesthetics as you move between the countries in campaign, which from a mechanical point of view is totally unnecessary but a nice graphical touch nonetheless. Now, while Allied General is great and all and a very decent and superior successor to the original, it's not without its faults. The main, biggest and most painful one being supply lines, which are as clumsy as they always been in the series, effectively making certain tactical strategies impossible, as you're incapable of supplying units effectively, which makes some strategic approaches very difficult to pull off, for instance encircling the enemy to attack him from all flanks. It's incredibly annoying if you're someone who likes to lay out deep strategical plans and then use them to stop or even conquer often overwhelming enemy forces, as in Allied General some of these are just not feasible. Don't get me wrong though, it's still a great game, just nowhere near as good as it could have been. Battle Isle 2220, Shadow of the Emperor aka Battle Isle 3, was supposed to be a crowning jewel in the series of turn-based sci-fi strategy games. Did it succeed though? I don't know, let's discuss it and then you'll tell me. Preferably somewhere in the comments below so that I could see it, cause you know, if you would just literally say it, how would I know what was it? Anyway, Battle Isle 3's story is not great. You play as Caro, a brainwashed agent of evil who doesn't realize it herself and is bent on destroying Ben Harris, son of the great strategist and a hero of previous game. So if you played Battle Isle 2, you're literally playing against your own in-game son. If that wasn't enough, the silly story is told by embarrassingly badly acted FMV cutscenes, which are all quite obviously filmed in front of the green screen with backgrounds added on later. Fortunately, story is not what you play strategies for, so I'll not hold it against the game. The engine used in Battle Isle 3 looks identical to the one powering Battle Isle 2, only moved to Windows and polished just a tiny bit to look fresher compared to the previous DOS release. So now you've got a pretty nice high color presentation, bigger maps and 3 levels of zoom, and that's pretty much it. Oh no, wait, there's also textures plastered on top of the same old 3D animations that the battles are portrayed with. They're not better, just textured. Still, if you're like me and enjoyed the previous games, there's no reason not to like this one. There is only one new unit, which clearly is an afterthought as it cannot be built. You have to get it for a particular mission and it can only be repaired. If it's gone for good. Now, it may seem like I'm dumping heavy stinky poos of disappointment on Battle Isle 3, and I'm not. I really like it actually. The game, not the poos. And I'm just pointing out the shortcomings, nothing more. So, to counter them, let me tell you about some nice improvements that were not present in the series before. For instance, the enemy turns are much quicker, only showing summary of invisible actions and not taking as long as it would have to perform all of them in real time. Which, trust me, on some of those bigger maps with dozens of units makes huge difference. Some planes and submarines can actually change their operating height, a very nice change indeed, and some units can have different weapons aimed at being better for defeating of certain kinds of enemies. Surviving units also kinda move between the missions, not really moving though, as they realistically only appear in the new ones hardened if they survive the earlier ones and are also a part of the predefined roster for the latter. Oh, and hardly ever there are only 2 factions in the battle, most of the 20 included scenarios have at least 3, but regardless of how many are present on the battlefield, they always align with one of the 2 opposing sides. And lastly, the battles are tougher than before, which is good as they used to be just a tad easier than I'd like them to be. That said, it's worth pointing out that for the most part the difficulty comes from enemy having overwhelming forces and more supplies. So cheating, and not really having better AI than before. Battle Isle 3 is not a perfect game, but I always had soft spots for the series and made sure to at the very least try them all out. And as sci-fi turn-based tactical strategies from the mid-90s go, this one's not bad. Ceireavne II is a sci-fi action rail shooter that's set on pre-rendered VO backgrounds and is direct follow-up to immensely popular and well-received first game. You're still Zach, the protagonist of original Ceireavne, and after being resurrected and disconnected from Ceireavne itself, you're quickly drawn into action-packed story of good versus evil. And you're the good in it, to be precise, cause you know, a do-gooder and universal hero such as yourself would not have it any other way. Ceireavne II is an on-rail shooter, conceptually very similar to Rebel Assault games, having you take part in various action shootery scenes in which you have little to no control on how the story will unfold, as it's aggressively linear. It's not a surprise though, I mean it's an on-rail game, so it kinda implies that your choice will be limited to who shoot first rather than if shoot them at all. But despite following one of the very successful games in the genre, it does not really deliver enough to warrant a place in history. Sure, the graphics are incredible for the time, way better than those in its progenitor, it doesn't really invent in any way imaginable. It does the same things, just looking better. And while this approach is something we're familiar with today thanks to companies like Ubisoft or EA, may their sales forever reflect care put in their titles, it doesn't excuse this sorry take on a sequel. Even the worst game in existence, Pro Soccer 2190, was more creative than Ceireavne II is, as it actually spawned a new kind of sci-fi take on football/soccer. Sure, you can play it and there's nothing remotely enjoyable about it, but it's not stuck in the past same way Ceireavne II is. To be clear, if you have to pick between the two for whatever the reason, despite me not giving a thumbs up for Ceireavne II, Pro Soccer is just another kind of unspeakable evil and do not pick it. Havoc is basically modern for the 1995 take on Battlezone, and if you're just about to chapter skip to the next game, don't, because you may end up liking what you'll see. Its story is so silly, I won't dignify it with recalling it here, but what you must know is just that there are 3 tanks to choose from, or tank-like vehicles really, a fast and nimble one, heavily armored one, and obviously one that sits somewhere in between the earlier 2. And when you make your pick, the crazy fast-paced action-packed romp starts and doesn't end until the game over, for better or worse. Havoc, as the name implies, is all about destruction of anything and everything you come across. And you do so, killing all other vehicles, enemy installations, and picking up weapon and shield refills and power-ups along the chaos-filled game world. All the freaking time. And when everything that could be destroyed is, and you're the last one standing, driving, flying, hovering, or whatever your vehicle does, you jump gate to another level and it's rinse and repeat until completion. Yeah, I said it. But I didn't have anything particularly nasty in mind, so if you thought of it, you can only blame yourself. Also, let me know if you did, so that I could send Batman to give you a quick lesson on how to behave in public places such as YouTube channels. Havoc feels like brutally fast and loud arcade game that would be eating up coins from players like a hungry hippo if it ever released in this, and would see queues forming of dozens of players willing to just have a go at it. It is not a thinking man's game, however, and don't take it the wrong way, I'm not saying that only silly sausages play it. Dumb cabbages, foolish potatoes and brainless carrots can have fun playing Havoc too. It's a game you fire up whenever you wanna let off some steam and don't involve your brain in it at all, when you wanna forget about anything and everything and just give your grey mass a breather. And for that reason and use case, I really like it. Oh, and up to 16 players can play together in online multiplayer, which is just fantastic, provided you find another 15 people keen on doing so. Hover came with every single installation CD of Windows 95 and was supposed to be a show-off of new system's multimedia gaming capabilities. And that it did, but when you take off your rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia, you'll quickly realize that there's not much left for a modern gamer. Hover is a capture the flag type of a game where you and your opponent strive to capture the other one's flags, all for points. And that's it. The end. Good night. Goodbye. Sayonara. Ramen. Sushi. Pickled eggs. What? Never mind. There's not much more to the game really. It features 3 distinctive themes, which all look and feel positive in 1993's early DOS FPS, and 16 levels that cycle through them. There's no weapons to speak of, and while there are power-ups, some that activate at once and others that do upon using them, their usefulness is at best questionable. The difficulty choice really only changes how fast your hover turns, so whatever you pick there, it shouldn't really influence how tough your opponent will be. And he won't, as for the most case he doesn't care about you at all and will not really try to use any of these power-ups against you. Frankly speaking, it's a bit let down of a game. Today. Back then, when you just got your new PC or installed new Windows on your trusty DOS gaming machine, chances are this may have been one of the very few real Windows 95 games you had. And as such, as a Windows 3D capabilities and fast rendering show-off, it was a-okay first attempt, and most importantly, a free game. I know, some of you love Hover to bits as it radiates with that melancholy you hold so dear for these times, and I get it, but objectively speaking, it's not great, even if important title in lives of many retro gamers. I love my sim games. And you know what? They don't even have to start with sim for as long as the sim part is all in the gameplay. And for Sim Tower, it's kinda both. So win, kinda win. As the title gives it away, you're all about building a tower, a high-rise of your dreams, that you have to build to not only look presentable and attractive to potential tenants and businesses, but also to be multifunctional and most importantly profitable. So a successful skyscraper will not only have offices or apartments, but also a whole range of businesses, restaurants, theaters and even shopping malls. But if these are the meat of your investment, the elevators and stairs are the bones that meat is settled on. So smart and efficient management of these, especially their location, is a key for success. I mean, you're not gonna see me going to grab a lunch in a restaurant for which I have to queue to even get in a lift going to, or climb 30 flights of stairs. And people coming to and living in your tower wouldn't either. Sim Tower is SimCity's smaller cousin and a much better game than Simtown we spoke about a video or two ago. And while it's a decently deep simulation, it doesn't hold a candle to the city. There's a lot you can do, sure, but eventually as much fun as you're having, certain repeating scenarios will start to surface. And at first you'll be like, oh yeah, sure, this happened before and now again, but I'm going to witness something new and cool. And you do, but then you see same things over and over and at some point nothing new shows up. There's nothing coming you've not seen before and you have that sudden realization that that's it. And it instantly kills the game for you. Cause in SimCity, for instance, where you also have a limited number of things that can happen, things like power crisis, lack of water, crime rates skyrocketing, or even disaster of sorts, among others, they are same, but their consequences may be dramatically different depending on how you've built your city, how it's been designed to perfection, or in an entirely random manner. In Sim Tower, whatever happens, happens, and the consequences are nearly always identical. It's a bit heartbreaking seeing the potential of the game go to waste, but I suppose not all sim games have to be timeless classics. Now, once again, I really like Sim Tower, and I don't mind coming back to it every so and so years for a game or two, but that's as much as I need, cause I get bored with it quickly. SimCity 2000, you can play basically forever. So yeah. Good game, could be great, but it's just good. Give it a go, if for nothing else then at least to see what it's all about. And that's 1995, folks. It may have been the first seriously good year for Windows gaming, in no small part thanks to the release of at the time groundbreaking Windows 95, but there's a lot more to come for 1996 and later. Initial list of games for it, before I get Batman to remove some dots, is well over 150 titles. So, even if many of these will be dropped, there's still gonna be a lot of classic games that we consider cult titles today. That, however, is a story for the videos covering 1996. For now, let me know what you think of 1995. Was it a great year? Or an amazing year? Or spectacular even? Cause you wouldn't dare calling it crap now, would you? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. If you didn't, well then there's thumbs down there too. But I suppose you wouldn't have persevered up to this point if you really didn't. Around 60% of you are not subscribed, and there's currently no way of knowing if YouTube will decide to recommend you the next episode or not, other than subscribing and hitting that bell, that is. And when you hit that bell, whenever the new video is out, YouTube will actually send you a small and friendly notification about it, so you wouldn't miss it. If you'd like to support the channel, Patreon and YouTube memberships are a great way of doing so. They will help me release better content, and also they get first dibs on all new videos before they're publicly accessible on YouTube. If you can't or don't want to do that though, likes and subscribes are great too. I would like to take a moment here and thank all the YouTube creators from whose videos short bits were taken to serve as a background to my commentary. They're amazing and stars among the retro community. You will find names of their channels at the top of the screen when their footage is running, and also in the video description below. For me though, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.